Chapter 1133. The Green-Robed Man. Yi Xian obviously knew the green-robed man, but he didn't know how strong he was. But he should be on the same level as the plain-dressed woman. And the green-robed man gave him a very strange feeling. That feeling was a bit like a relative, and to him, this feeling was a bit absurd. Amu suddenly said, "Why didn't he directly kill those nether spirits?" Yi Xian nodded, and also asked, "Yes. He has that strength, right?" Xiao Dao said with a smile, "He does have that strength, but at that time, the nether spirits chose to retreat, and didn't fight to the death with him. They retreated to the nether spirit world, and that nether spirit world is very, very big. Apart from that, that place is very special, and ordinary people can't enter at all, because there's no spiritual qi, only endless death qi and yin qi. The space inside is also different from the space of the normal world. The space there is like a multidimensional universe, and you'll get lost if you walk inside. It can be said that even shattering void tier elites can't come out after entering." Speaking up to here, she paused, and then said, "This is also the scary part about them. If they can't beat them, they can run, and others can't chase them. Of course, since ancient times, they almost have no natural enemies, except for the sword sect. In fact, if it wasn't for the sword sect's sect leader heavily injuring them with his own strength, with the sword sect's strength, they could at most protect themselves, and couldn't stop them." A Qian suddenly asked, "Where did they come from?" Xiao Dao looked at a Qian, and said with a smile, "You asked a good question. I really did investigate them. This nether spirit isn't from this universe, nor from the higher realm, but from another place." Amu suddenly asked, "What place? Be more detailed." Xiao Dao glanced at Amu, and shook his head. "You've also become a curious baby." "Amu." Xiao Dao was silent for a moment, and then said, "Fine. I'll tell you about this universe I know. In fact, this universe didn't have any 3, 4, or 5 dimensions. All living beings existed in one universe. However, everyone lives in different places. Hence, there is such a hierarchy in the universe." Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Where did the universe come from?" Xiao Dao looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before asking, "There's also life. How was the first life formed? Also, why do the stars shine? Also," Xiao Dao suddenly punched out. Boom! Yi Xian was blasted hundreds of feet away. The moment he stopped, the space behind him cracked. The girls looked at Yi Xian and shook their heads. Was this guy crazy, asking such a question? However, they were actually a little curious and wanted to know, how did the universe come into being? How did life come into being? However, they wouldn't ask. In the distance, Yi Xian rubbed his chest. This Xiao Dao was too violent. He hit people at the drop of a hat. Xiao Dao glanced at Yi Xian. "I haven't studied these questions you asked. The Prophet has. There might be an answer in the study. You can take a look for yourself when you open it in the future. Also, I really don't know everything. Do you understand?" Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. "Understood." Xiao Dao was deep in thought. "This chapter is not finished. Please turn the page." She took a deep breath and calmed down. Otherwise, she really wanted to kill this guy in front of her. Amu suddenly walked to Xiao Dao's side. She held Xiao Dao's hand and smiled. "Miss Xiao Dao, don't be angry. Come, let's continue talking about this universe." Xiao Dao was silent for a moment before saying, "Strictly speaking, the upper realm is not the 6th dimension. It belongs to the boundary between the 6th dimension and the 5th dimension. However, they are related to the 6th dimension. This is because the first batch of people in the upper realm were driven out by the people of the 6th dimension." Amu frowned slightly. "Driven out?" Xiao Dao nodded. A Qian suddenly asked, "Why?" Xiao Dao said softly, "This has to start from the system of the 6th dimension. The 6th dimension doesn't have the 5th dimension's tribulations. Why? Because they protect the 6th dimension's universe extremely well. In that universe, they strictly control the number of people who can cultivate. The population there is less than 1/10,000,000th of the population here. In addition, not everyone can cultivate there. Only those with great talent or perseverance can cultivate there. Those without talent and are unwilling to work hard will live for 60 to 70 years at most before dying. And because they can't cultivate, they can't destroy the spiritual energy there, so they can't cause any substantial damage to that universe. Hearing this, the expressions of the people in the room changed. Could it be like this? The mutated beast scripture suddenly asked. No one resisted? Xiao Dao looked at the mutated beast scripture. How? The strongest group of people joined forces to establish an orderly system. How could the people below resist? How could they resist? As for those who have the ability to resist, they would choose to join them to maintain that orderly system, because that was the only way their universe could last forever. Besides that, they have all sorts of measures to protect the universe. For example, there's a power called the Union Hall. The Union Hall was jointly established by various top powers, and it's filled with extraordinary experts, the extremely strong kind. They're restricted by the various powers, but they don't listen to the orders of any single power. Their duty is to protect that universe. As she spoke, she paused for a moment and said, in that universe, the experts of the Union Hall patrol everywhere. Besides cultivating, they don't allow anyone to steal the spiritual energy of the heavens and the earth on a large scale, let alone destroy the heavens and the earth. If you want to fight, you can. They have special battlefields there. So long as experts have attained a certain strength, they must enter those battlefields. Otherwise, once they're discovered, the Union Hall has the right to kill first and report later. The Union Hall is divided into the Martial Arts Hall and the Martial Arts Hall. The Martial Arts Hall is in charge of enforcing the law, and the Martial Arts Hall is in charge of repairing and balancing. Amu frowned slightly. Repairing and balancing? What do you mean? Xiao Dao said softly. Those people from the Wind Palace are really scary. They're all scholars. They might not be very strong, but they're really knowledgeable. At first, I thought that the prophet wasn't from the Wind Palace. But after thinking about it, I don't think so. Yi Xian asked, why? Xiao Dao said in a low voice. The prophet is at least 10 times scarier than the people from the Wind Palace. Yi Xian still wanted to ask something, but Xiao Dao suddenly said, let's get back to the main topic. Let's talk about the Wind Palace. Their duty is to repair and balance. This repair is when some places become thin due to some natural reasons, they will repair it. Apart from that, they also have all sorts of array masters. These array masters have set up a lot of array formations to protect the spiritual energy in that universe. These array formations will protect the spiritual energy very well. For example, the spiritual energy in Shaman City can only be used for 10 years under normal circumstances. However, with those array formations in control Shaman City, this chapter is not over, please continue. The spiritual energy here can be used for at least 50 years. Hearing this, the expressions of Yi Xian and the others changed. Xiao Dao continued, there's one more thing. They have a very strict law. No one is allowed to harm the spirits of the world. If anyone dares to harm the spirits of the world, they will receive an extremely cruel punishment. In the end, they will be thrown into bright prison and suffer the pain of being burned by the flames of karma for all eternity. Amu said in a low voice, is the status of the spirits that high there? Xiao Dao nodded. Very, very high, terrifyingly high. This is because the spirits of the world can naturally form spiritual energy and nourish the world. It can be said that without those spirits of the world, it's impossible for them to maintain the balance of the spiritual energy for a long time. As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. If that little white fellow goes to that place, she will be worshipped like a god. Based on what I know, even in the 6th dimension, there isn't a single spirit ancestor. And the 6th dimension is also doing everything it can to find a spirit ancestor. The use of a spirit ancestor is simply unimaginable, especially that little fellow. That little fellow is no longer a normal spirit ancestor. She has mutated, and her ability has never appeared even in the place I come from. Of course, it's best if the 6th dimension doesn't have any ideas about her. The people around that little fellow can defeat the 6th dimension. Yi Xian suddenly asked, Miss Amu, did you say the place you come from? Where did you come from? In the field, all the girls looked at little Daoist. They were also very curious about Xiao Dao's background. Xiao Dao said flatly, I come from another ancient place. Yi Xian blinked. What ancient place? Xiao Dao looked at Yi Xian. Why are you asking so many questions? Does where I come from have anything to do with you? Yi Xian. Seeing that Xiao Dao was slightly agitated, Amu suddenly said, Come, let's talk about the sixth dimension, talk about the sixth dimension. Xiao Dao pondered for a moment, and then said, the sixth dimension attaches great importance to the protection of that world, especially the Union Hall. This power is very tolerant because there aren't only humans there. There are also other living beings. For example, some demon spirits can enter. Of course, the prerequisite is that you have strength and ability. As long as you have strength and ability, they will welcome you to join. Amu said softly, in that case, the sixth dimension's universe is much better than ours? Xiao Dao said softly, it's not much better. It's just that this place can't be compared to their place. Compared to that place, this place is like a barbarian land. A Qian suddenly said, Miss Xiao Dao, just now you said that the people of the upper realm were chased down by the people of the sixth dimension. Xiao Dao nodded. Yes. A Qian was a little puzzled. Why? Xiao Dao smiled. Where there are people there are benefits, and where there are benefits there are conflicts. The sixth dimension is not really harmonious. There are also internal problems. Back then there were serious internal problems. There were two forces that had serious differences. And in the end the two forces directly fought. That time, it was really too much for the sixth dimension, because there were some differences within the Union Hall. Both sides fought. And in the end, the losing group was forced to leave the sixth dimension and came to the lower realm to linger on. P.S. You can do hair at the healthcare center. Why don't you believe it? Also, healthcare center is just a simple massage. Do you have any misunderstandings about this industry? End of this chapter. Chapter 1134. At this moment, everyone in the field suddenly understood. Yi Xian finally understood the ins and outs of the matter. His enemy was not the entire sixth dimension, but the upper realm. Amu suddenly asked, their target is the bookstore, right? Xiao Dao nodded, yes. And the place where this bookstore once appeared was in the sixth dimension. Amu asked again, is the prophet from the sixth dimension? Xiao Dao spread her hands. I'm not sure about that. When this bookstore first appeared in the sixth dimension, I was already here. And I didn't investigate it. Amu was silent. Yi Xian suddenly asked, Miss Xiao Dao, in your opinion, what exactly is in this bookstore? Xiao Dao was silent for a moment, then said, the upper realm is so desperate to snatch this thing. The thing in this thing must be very important to them. And if it's important to them, it might also be important to the sixth dimension. Hearing this, Yi Xian's face darkened. In that case, the sixth dimension might also become his enemy? Xiao Dao suddenly said, of course, your priority now is to deal with the upper realm. In order to deal with you, these guys did not hesitate to join forces with those Yin spirits. You really have to be careful. Amu said in a deep voice, Miss Xiao Dao, where did these Yin spirits come from? Xiao Dao was silent for a moment, then said, they were also driven out. Yi Xian and the others. Xiao Dao said softly, they came from a very, very far place, even farther than the sixth dimension. Wherever they go they are like locusts, really barren. And their cultivation method is even more peculiar. They don't need spiritual energy, because they rely on devouring. Their growth is devouring. And it is precisely because of this that they are terrifying. They can devour other people's cultivation for their own use. If it wasn't for the sword sect stopping them, this universe would have been gone. Yi Xian suddenly said, does Tendo know? Xiao Dao nodded, yes. This was also the reason why she had asked the plain dress woman to stay back then. She knew that the woman in the plain dress was feared by both the upper realm and the Yin spirits in this universe. But once she leaves, those fellows won't have any worries anymore. A woman in a plain dress. Yi Xian looked up. He had no idea where she was at the moment. Little Taoist continued. Actually, you and the heavenly Tao have the same goal now. This is also why she has helped you so many times. It can be said that she is helping you and using you at the same time. Yi Xian said in a low voice. Can I also make use of her? Xiao Dao looked at Yi Xian. As long as you have the ability, you can definitely do it. She's not someone who can't afford to play. Yi Xian nodded. Understood. Qian suddenly said. Can we go to the sixth dimension? Everyone looked at Qian, and Qian hesitated for a moment before he said, I think that place is better. Xiao Dao said softly, It's indeed better, but it's impossible for all of you to go there. No, it should be said that they won't allow all of you to go there, because all of you won't abide by the rules there. For example, your Tian clan. If all of you go there, then the cultivations of countless clansmen of your Tian clan will be crippled, and they won't be able to cultivate anymore. They can only die of old age. Let me ask you, would they be willing to do that? Qian fell silent. Giving up on their cultivation and being unable to cultivate was even more painful than killing them. Xiao Dao said softly, This is your home. Don't think about destroying it and looking for a new home. Perhaps there will be a new home, a better home, but it might be someone else's home as well. Instead of that, why don't you protect what you have now? Qian said softly, Miss Little Taoist is right. It's just that to change is so difficult. Xiao Dao smiled. Now do you know how difficult it is to be a prophet? It's because he wants to change. Trying to prove it is as difficult as ascending to the heavens. This is not something that can be changed with just strength. For example, if you want to change, all the cultivators in the fifth dimension will be your enemies and will oppose you. Amu suddenly said, Then how did the sixth dimension do it? Xiao Dao looked at Amu and said, Blood. The blood of countless eras has flowed. Moreover, they have an extremely powerful guide, and this guide established this order on the corpses of countless ancestors. After saying that, she paused and then said, To be more accurate, it was two people from different eras. One person created a small spark and ignited a light of hope, while the other ignited it and turned it into a prairie fire. Their method won't work here, at least not now. Yi Xian nodded his head. He also felt that it was unrealistic. Change. Who was willing to give up their cultivation? Who was willing to stop cultivating and become an ordinary person, growing old and dying? No one was willing. It could be said that if they wanted to do so, it would be equivalent to becoming enemies with all the cultivators in the fifth dimension. At this moment, Xiao Dao suddenly turned her head to look at the horizon. Her gaze pierced through the starry sky, and after a moment she said softly, Arrow is about to break through. The first shattering void tier elite of the Cambrian era? Arrow was about to break through. Hearing this, everyone was stunned and soon, everyone disappeared on the spot. Heading to the Great Desolation Country. Arrow breaking through, that was a big deal. In the field, Xiao Dao raised her head to look at the horizon, a trace of worry in her eyes. Arrow breaking through. If the higher realms didn't stop Arrow, then Arrow would really reach the shattering void tier. For someone like Arrow to reach the shattering void tier, that wasn't an ordinary shattering void tier. It could be said that once Arrow reached the shattering void tier, at present, in the entire fifth dimension, only Tendo could beat her. She couldn't beat him, because her current strength hadn't recovered, and in the current situation, she couldn't beat Arrow who reached the shattering void tier. Only Tendo could. After the woman in the plain dress left, at present, the best fighter in the entire fifth dimension was Tendo. And how strong Tendo was, and to what extent, no one knew. It had always been a mystery. Xiao Dao withdrew her thoughts and turned to look at the horizon. Arrow, a super swordsman of the shattering void tier, that battle prowess, even in the higher realms, couldn't be said to be invincible. But it was still invincible. Would the higher realms really let Arrow break through smoothly? In the field, Xiao Dao was silent for a long time, and then turned to leave. In a certain part of the starry sky, a woman was slowly walking. In her hand, she was holding a small roasted fish. This woman was Tendo. At this moment, Tendo suddenly stopped and turned to look. After a moment she smiled slightly. About to break through? After saying that, she shook her head and turned to leave. She walked sloppily, swinging the small fish in her hand. She didn't look like Tendo at all, but more like a problem girl. In a short while the woman disappeared at the end of the galaxy. Great Desolate Country. After Yi Xian and the others arrived at the Great Desolate Country, the king of the Great Desolate Country instantly breathed a sigh of relief. Arrow's breakthrough had reached a critical moment, And if someone came to disturb him at this moment, the great desolate country couldn't stop them at all. Fortunately, Yi Xian had come with some strong people. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Dao, who wasn't far away. How much longer? Xiao Dao glanced at Arrow's direction and said softly, 3 days at most. 3 days. Yi Xian looked up at the horizon. 3 days, would the people of the higher realms give 3 days? No, they definitely wouldn't give Arrow these 3 days. Yi Xian opened his palm, and a voice transmission talisman suddenly disappeared. No matter what, he had to be fully prepared. Somewhere in the void, an illusory old man looked down. His gaze pierced through the galaxy, and directly saw the great desolate country. His gaze was always on the area where Arrow was. He had already sensed an extremely powerful sword aura. Arrow. The people of the higher realms knew about this woman, Swordsman. Currently, Arrow was only at the ruler realm, but his strength had already reached an extremely terrifying level. If he broke through again? Thinking of this, the old man's brows deeply wrinkled. No matter what, he couldn't let Arrow break through. At this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared beside him. This person was the Lord of the Dark World. The old man glanced at the Lord, and the Lord looked down. What's the plan? The old man chuckled. Naturally, we can't let her break through. Once this woman breaks through, it will be extremely disadvantageous to us. The Lord pointed downwards. That little Taoist is there too. She alone can fend off countless experts. The old man softly said. That depends on what kind of expert it is. The Lord suddenly said, my dark world can't stop her. Now that he had learned his lesson, he didn't want to be cannon fodder. The old man smiled. Just watch. The Lord deeply looked at the old man, but didn't say anything. In the great desolate country, the aura in the area where Arrow was getting stronger and stronger. That aura was also mixed with sword aura. At this moment, all the experts of the great desolate country were looking over here. Arrow was about to break through. Arrow was the pride of the great desolate country, and the pride of the entire Cambrian era. Just like this, time passed bit by bit. About 2 days later, the aura in the area where Arrow was getting stronger and stronger. That aura spread towards the sky, causing the entire galaxy to tremble. At this moment, Amu suddenly walked to the side of Yi Xian, looked up at the sky, and softly said, the 5th dimension tribulation is coming. Yi Xian chuckled. Don't be afraid, if you really can't hold on, I will put you in the tower. We will hide in the tower. This tower is hard enough. It can definitely block the 5th dimension tribulation. Amu blinked. Can I? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Amu shook her head. I still have my clansmen. I have to stay with them. Clansmen. Yi Xian was silent. His Xiaota couldn't carry so many people. Yi Xian turned his head to look at the sky. Speaking of Xiaota, he suddenly thought of Lian Qian and Yinjia. These two said they went out to look for Dao La. But now there was no news at all. They couldn't be lost, right? At this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in the sky above the great desolate country. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and looked up at the old man. The old man looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Give us the universal library, and we will leave. We will not disturb your world, we will keep our word. Yi Xian opened his palm, and the universal library suddenly appeared in front of the old man. Yi Xian said with a smile, take it. I don't want it anymore. Everyone. At the side, Xiao Dao glanced at Yi Xian. She knew that this guy was definitely playing some dirty trick. Chapter 1135. Does Yi Xian look like someone who would suffer a loss? Doesn't seem like it. Xiao Dao looks at Yi Xian curiously. What is this guy planning? In the sky, the old man is stunned when he sees the book room. This is different from the script he had in mind. This doesn't seem real. The old man doesn't take the book room. Instead, he looks at Yi Xian. Yi Xian blinks and says, you don't want it? The old man stares at Yi Xian. What are you playing at? Yi Xian shakes his head. What do you want? Didn't you ask me to hand it over? Now that I hand it over, you ask me what I'm playing at. If I don't hand it over, you want to hit me. I'm really in a difficult situation. The old man looks at Yi Xian. He doesn't take the book room. Even if you use your toes to think, you can tell that this is strange. At this moment, the Lord suddenly appears by the old man's side. He looks at the old man and says, "Since he handed it over, why don't we take it?" With that, he puts the book room away. However, he's still very vigilant. Obviously, he's afraid that Yi Xian is playing tricks. However, Yi Xian doesn't play any tricks. After the Lord puts the book room away, he looks at Yi Xian after confirming that there are no accidents. There's also that Xiao Ta. Yi Xian smiles and points with his finger. The prism pagoda flies in front of the Lord. The Lord squints his eyes and puts the prism pagoda away. There are still no accidents. The Lord stares at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiles. "I gave it to you." The Lord suddenly turns to look at the old man. "Attack." The old man squints his eyes and doesn't answer. The Lord says coldly, "This person is so talented. Aren't you afraid? There's also that arrow. Once this woman breaks through, do you still have the confidence to kill her? Even if you do, how much will it cost?" The old man is silent and hesitant. Yi Xian. Arrow. These two people could pose a great threat to them, especially Arrow. Once this woman broke through, her threat would be extraordinary. Thinking of this, the old man's eyes were filled with killing intent. At this moment the Lord said, Yi Xian took the initiative to hand over Xiao Ta and the bookstore. He is showing weakness. He wants to buy time for Arrow. His goal is to let Arrow break through smoothly. As he spoke, he paused for a moment before he continued. "If we don't eliminate the roots, the weeds will grow again with the spring breeze." The old man looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "I think what he said makes sense." Yi Xian smiled and said, "I also think that what he said makes sense." The old man looked at Yi Xian. "Then, I might have to break my promise." Yi Xian blinked. "Sure." As soon as he spoke, the prism pagoda in the Lord's hand shook violently. A moment later, a sword flew out from within. The executing heaven sword. Because the prism pagoda was in the Lord's hand, the moment the sword appeared, it was already at the center of the Lord's forehead. However, the sword ancestor's reaction was extremely fast. The moment the sword touched his forehead, his body became illusory, and he wanted to dodge. However, at this moment, a mysterious force suddenly enveloped him. Sword domain. The moment the sword domain enveloped the Lord, he was immediately suppressed. His body stopped for a moment, and it was this moment that allowed the executing heaven sword to pierce through his forehead. Hiss! The sword tore through the sky. An array of sword light remained in the Lord's head. Bang! The Lord's body collapsed, but his soul had already escaped. However, at this moment, another sword flew out from the prism pagoda. The soul-suppressing sword. The Lord's pupils constricted when he saw the soul-suppressing sword. He knew that he was done for. Hiss! The soul-suppressing sword pierced into the Lord's body. Bang! A powerful wave of soul energy suddenly surged out from the soul-suppressing sword, and the surrounding space trembled. It was like an earthquake, and it was incomparably terrifying. At this time, Yi Xian opened his palm, and the prism pagoda and the bookhouse returned to his hand. Yi Xian looked at the elder. The elder hadn't made a move since the beginning, nor could he. This was because Yi Xian had killed the Lord in the blink of an eye. Of course, Yi Xian knew very well that the main reason he was able to kill the Lord was because the Lord himself had been injured. After the Lord had been severely injured by Xiao Dao, his injuries hadn't healed at all because the time was too short. Besides that, the Lord had the prism pagoda. But the Lord didn't know that the prism pagoda could cooperate with him. Careless. In the end, the Lord was too careless. In the sky, the elder looked down at Yi Xian with an expressionless face. His expression was calm, as if he had expected this a long time ago. They had already investigated Yi Xian carefully, and the Lord had always been extremely wary of Yi Xian. This was also why he did not go and fetch Xiao Ta and the bookhouse earlier. The Lord had also been wary, but he had underestimated Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at the old man, and the old man smiled faintly. "I heard that Yi Xian values friendship." Yi Xian looked at the old man. "Are you going to threaten me with something now?" The old man smiled and said, "I've made some calculations. My people should have reached Shaman City by now." Yi Xian smiled. The old man narrowed his eyes slightly. Yi Xian looked at the old man. "I wish them good luck." The old man lifted his head and looked at the sky. His gaze pierced through space and arrived at Shaman City. At that moment, 12 black-robed people had appeared in the sky above Shaman City at some point of time, and there were 19 people standing before them. The ones leading the group were Tai Yi and Shengong. All of them were rulers. In this universe, besides monsters like Xiao Dao, Arrow and Tendo, there was no one who could instantly kill these 19 righteous gods. Of course, they had to get rid of the unique aspect of the sword sect. Tai Yi looked at the 12 black-robed people before him and said flatly, "Kill them." The moment he finished speaking, the 19 people charged forward. The 12 people did not retreat. They charged straight at Tai Yi and the others. Wuxia looked at the sky from below Shaman City, and by his side was Hao Tian. The Celestials had already moved to Shaman City. This was Yi Xian's idea. This way, they would not be defeated one by one. At that moment, Wuxia suddenly said, "I didn't expect that we would work together." Hao Tian said softly, "For survival. If the Wu clan and the Celestials still wanted to fight against each other, then the only thing that would await them would be destruction." At that moment, both of them felt very lucky, because they had a god tier and a great priestess. Without these two people, it would be extremely difficult for the Celestials and the Wu clan to work together. In the sky above the kingdom of Great Wilderness, the old man withdrew his gaze and looked at Yi Xian. "From what I know, there are a lot of people who care about this." Yi Xian smiled. "Are you talking about Fu Wenzong and the Worldwide Academy?" The old man narrowed his eyes and turned his head to look. In the sky above Fu Wenzong. In the sky above Fu Wenzong, there were 5 black-robed people. But facing these 5 black-robed people were 5 righteous gods. They were all from Zhou Sacred Mountain. 5 against 5. All of them were peak ruler realm powerhouses, and none of them could do anything to the other. In the sky above the Worldwide Academy, there were 13 black-robed people. They were all peak ruler realm powerhouses. The reason why there were more of them than Fu Wenzong was because Zhang Wenxiu had a special relationship with Yi Xian. Their target was Zhang Wenxiu. But in the sky above Fu Wenzong, besides the 5 righteous gods, there was also the sword sect's Elder Gu and a true dragon. There was also a gigantic 8 trigrams rune in the sky above the Worldwide Academy. This rune was activated by all the people in the Worldwide Academy, so they did not have to worry about the rune running out of energy. At least they did not have to worry about it for the time being. But now, regardless of whether it was Fu Wenzong, the Worldwide Academy, or Shaman City, they only needed to drag it out. Drag it out until Arrow broke through. Once Arrow broke through, all their problems would be solved. In the sky above Shaman City, the black-robed old man's face suddenly turned dark. He did not expect that Yi Xian would be prepared for this. Below, Yi Xian smiled. He was not in a hurry. What he needed to do now was to wait for Arrow to break through. Arrow was in a critical period right now, and he could not afford to make any mistakes. Yi Xian turned his head around and cast a glance into the distance. Xiao Dao was standing in the distance. She had been standing by Arrow's side all this while. With her around, even if the Tendo attacked, it would be impossible for him to disturb Arrow for a short period of time. Based on the current situation, their situation was very stable. Yi Xian also felt that their situation was very stable. That was why he was very calm. In the sky, the black-robed old man suddenly fell silent. He did not retreat, and neither did he attack. It was as if he was waiting for something. When he saw this, Yi Xian frowned. His instincts told him that things were not as simple as they seemed. What was the old man waiting for? At that moment, a woman suddenly walked over from the distance. She was dressed in a white dress that was as white as snow. There was not a speck of dust on it, and in her left hand, she held a small fish that had been half eaten. All the people in the area looked at the woman who walked over. Tendo. The black-robed old man's calm expression suddenly became solemn when he saw the woman, and it grew even more solemn. He stared fixedly at Tendo, while clenching his fists, as if he was fearful of something. Yi Xian looked at Tendo and blinked. What's this woman doing here? Suddenly, the black-robed old man spoke in a low voice. Didn't you say that you wouldn't interfere? Tendo smiled. I just came to have a look. I don't have any plans. Suddenly, Yi Xian appeared in front of Tendo. He grabbed Tendo's hand and spoke excitedly. You're finally here. Everyone was speechless. Qian looked at Amu. Are they very familiar with each other? Amu blinked. Perhaps. Qian was speechless. In the sky, Tendo looked at Xian and blinked. We are very familiar with each other. Before she could finish speaking, Xian suddenly snatched the small fish from her hand. He chewed on it, and then gave Tendo a thumbs up. Delicious. It's much better than the last time you made it for me. Your cooking skills have improved a lot. Everyone was speechless. In the distance, the black-robed old man's face was gloomy and scary. These two have such a good relationship. In front of Xian, Tendo looked at Xian and blinked her eyes. Xian suddenly said seriously, Don't worry, Xian am here. As he spoke, he turned and pointed at the black-robed old man. I swear, as long as I still have a breath left in me, these people can forget about destroying our fifth dimension. I will use my life to guard the fifth dimension together. Whoever wants to harm, whoever wants to destroy the fifth dimension, must step over my Xian's dead body. As soon as he finished speaking, his body suddenly trembled violently. Then, tiny red runes that could be seen with the naked eye suddenly appeared on top of Xian's head, and then entered Xian's body one by one. Xian was stunned. This was different from the oath he made in the past. In the distance, Xiao Dao's face was terrifyingly gloomy. He swore to Tendo. Is this guy crazy? Feeling those tiny runes enter his body, Xian suddenly panicked. He looked at the sky and hesitated for a moment, then said, Can't I just pretend that I didn't make an oath? Tendo blinked her eyes. It's too late. The karma has been formed. Fate has been decided. Xian was speechless. P.S. The monthly votes are so few. Did I do something wrong? Chapter 1136. Oath. It must be said that at this moment, Xian was really panicking, because he felt that the oath he made was different from before. In the distance, Xiao Dao looked at Xian and shook his head. Swearing to Tendo, under normal circumstances, swearing to an ordinary person was useless, as it would not form karma. However, Xian was different. He was not an ordinary person. Moreover, he did not have the ability to cut off his own karma. Of course, the most important thing was that the person he swore to was Tendo. Tendo. This represented the karma of the entire fifth dimension. Xian swore to her. Just as Tendo said, the karma was formed, and his fate was set. What karma? The karma of Xian, and the fifth dimension. What fate? The fate of Xian and Tendo. Thinking of this, Xiao Dao shook his head again. Really a pig brain. In front of Xian, Tendo sincerely said, Thank you very much. I represent the billions of creatures in the fifth dimension to thank you. Xian smiled. We are on the same side. Why are you being so polite? Then, he turned to look at the black-robed old man. If you have any dirty tricks, use them all. After saying that, he retreated to the side of Tendo. In the distance, the black-robed old man looked at Tendo. Didn't you say that you would not care about anything? Tendo blinked. I really did not care about anything. The black-robed old man stared at Tendo. You are with him. Tendo was about to speak, but Xian suddenly pulled out his sword and pointed it at the black-robed old man. What nonsense are you talking about? If you don't want to fight, then quickly scram. I am telling you. I represent the billions of creatures in the fifth dimension to tell you that we do not welcome you. I will give you 3 days. If you do not scram from the fifth dimension, then I will not be polite. The black-robed old man looked at Xian. You are so arrogant. Xian laughed. Do you think we're joking with you? As he spoke, he looked at Tendo. Do I make sense? Tendo gently bit the grilled fish in his hand and said, Makes sense. Xian nodded, then looked at the black-robed old man. Why aren't you attacking? Was he worried about the Tendo? Don't worry, she won't make a move. She was just watching from the side. I'll fight you. Xian. We'll beat all of you up. Tendo looked at Xian. I won't make a move. Xian nodded. Don't make a move. I'll go first. We'll talk about it if I can't beat them. Tendo blinked. She still wanted to say something, but Xian had already rushed towards the black-robed elder in the distance. A ray of sword light tore through the battlefield. However, Xian's sword missed because the black-robed elder, had already retreated hundreds of feet. He did not make a move. In fact, the one the higher-ups were afraid of was not Yi Xian, Arrow, or Xiao Dao. It was the Tendo in front of them. Tendo. How strong was this woman? No one knew. If she intervened, they would have no chance of winning, because their people did not come down. Relying on the experts that they had cultivated and gathered in this cosmos, it was impossible to fight against Tendo and the others. It was not enough. Moreover, there was still Xiao Dao and Arrow who was about to break through. If these three women joined hands, they would be invincible in the fifth dimension. The black-robed old man looked up at the sky. Should he make a move or not? He naturally had a trump card. However, because of the addition of the Tendo, his trump card seemed powerless. He knew that even if he used all his trump cards, it was still impossible to kill the woman in front of him. Right at this moment, ripples suddenly appeared in the space in front of him. After a short moment, the black-robed old man took a deep look at the Tendo and Yi Xian, and then he turned around and left. Seeing this, Yi Xian was about to chase after him. Next to him, Tiandao suddenly laughed and said, "The person behind him can kill you." Yi Xian hurriedly stopped, and then he turned around to look at the Tendo. Is he really that strong? The Tendo laughed and said, "You can't kill him. It's more important to wait for Arrow to break through." Yi Xian looked at the Tendo. "You're not angry?" The Tendo laughed. "Are you talking about how you used me?" Yi Xian nodded. The Tendo shook his head and chuckled. "What's there to be angry about? Wasn't I using you as well?" Yi Xian chuckled. "You have a good attitude." The Tendo looked at Yi Xian. "Can I have a look at your study?" Yi Xian laughed. "Of course." After that, he flicked his finger, and the study landed in front of the Tendo. The Tendo looked at the study in her hand, and then she returned the study to Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo. "Do you know what's inside?" The Tendo laughed. "The things above." Yi Xian still wanted to ask something, but the Tendo suddenly said, "There is a barrier between the upper realm and us. The barrier is formed naturally by the laws of the universe. It is indestructible, and they don't have the ability to destroy it. But," saying that, she smiled, "they are trying to sneak down." Yi Xian frowned. "Sneak down? Can I?" The Tendo laughed. "Of course you can." At this time, Xiao Dao suddenly appeared beside the Tendo. She looked at the Tendo. "What do you mean by sneak down?" The Tendo chuckled. "The spirit tribe." Hearing this, Xiao Dao's expression changed. "The spirit tribe?" Yi Xian looked at Xiao Dao. "The universal barrier is useless against the spirit tribe?" The Xiao Dao nodded. "It's useless, because they can even swallow the universal barrier." Hearing this, Yi Xian's pupil shrank. "So abnormal?" The Xiao Dao said. "They are more than abnormal. They are very, very abnormal. If they go to the sixth dimension may not be able to stop them." The Tendo said softly, "It's a 40-60 chance." Little Taoist looked at Heaven's Will. Heaven's Will smiled and said, "The sixth dimension of Yin spirits. If it was in the past, the sixth dimension would have been crushed, because that was when the Yin spirits were at their strongest. At that time, they were invincible and unstoppable. If it wasn't for Swordsman, the spirit tribe would have dominated the fifth dimension and the sixth dimension." Yi Xian asked, "What about the sword sect?" The Xiao Dao said softly, "They didn't confront the sword sect head-on. It's not difficult for them to use some special methods to help the people from the upper realm come down." Yi Xian asked again, "Is there a big difference in strength between us and the upper realm?" The Xiao Dao smiled. "You can ask the Tendo." Yi Xian looked at Heavenly Dao, and Heavenly Dao said softly, "There's still quite a bit of difference. Of course, it's not as if we don't have the power to fight back. However, if they borrow the nether spirits, what you have to worry about is whether the sword sect can completely fend off the nether spirits. The worst-case scenario is that the sword sect will be held back by the nether spirits, and they will send some people to help the upper realm to deal with you. If that's the case, then you're finished." Yi Xian blinked. "Isn't it us? Think about it. If the spirit tribe enters the fifth dimension, won't the fifth dimension disappear?" The Tendo nodded. "Indeed," Yi Xian said seriously. "So we have a common enemy." The Tendo smiled. "They will only attack you. They won't attack me." The Yi Xian said in a deep voice. What happens after they attack me? Won't you be the only one left? The Tendo smiled mischievously. They won't kill you. After saying that, she turned around and left. Yi Xian. The Xiao Dao looked at the Tendo and said softly, You shouldn't have made that oath to her. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Xiao Dao, what will happen if I break that oath? The Xiao Dao shook his head. I don't know, but it's definitely not a good thing. Yi Xian was silent. The Xiao Dao said again. Actually, it's not entirely a bad thing. Yi Xian looked at the Xiao Dao. The Xiao Dao smiled. Cause and effect. That's the cause and effect between you and her. Didn't you notice it? That is, although she didn't help you, she has always been on your side. Just like just now. If it wasn't for her appearance, we would have been in a tough battle. She is on your side now. Or should I say, she has always been on your side. That's because you're not a threat to this universe, but the people above us are. Yi Xian smiled and said, Little Taoist, I don't understand. Why is he able to call out so many sovereign realm experts? Are sovereign realm experts everywhere like dogs? The Xiao Dao smiled. Think about it in a different way. It can be said that half of the ruler realm experts in this universe are with him, and the other half are with you. In other words, you're righteous gods. This universe has only had 50 to 60 ruler realm experts for so many years. Is that a lot? 50 to 60? Yi Xian chuckled. That's not a lot. The Xiao Dao nodded. Do you know why the Tendo is helping you? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, Because they aren't just plotting against my study room. They are plotting against this universe. The Xiao Dao smiled. Why do you say that? Yi Xian said softly. With so many ruler realm experts, it's impossible for them to submit in such a short time. There's only one explanation, and that is, those ruler realm experts have been colluding with them for a long time. The Xiao Dao nodded. Yes. In fact, if it weren't for you, those righteous gods might have followed them. If that's the case, then basically all the ruler realm experts in this universe are on his side. Yi Xian suddenly asked, Can all of them work together to overthrow the Tendo? The Xiao Dao was silent for a moment, and said, If it was a long time ago, 100 ruler realm experts and some shattering void tier elites could still pose a great threat to the Tendo. But now, as she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. Originally the Tendo wouldn't fight. She's very kind, just like the little white guy. Unfortunately, she wasn't as lucky as the little white guy to meet someone like the green-robed man. Yi Xian said in a low voice. She started to cultivate later? The Xiao Dao nodded. She started to learn later. She learned the martial arts of humans, and learned the advantages of all living things. It can be said that she has a very thorough understanding of humans, and all living things. Her talent in cultivation can only be described as terrifying. At this point she paused and then said, Can you feel the aura of Sword Dao on her? The Yi Xian was stunned. She's also a swordsman? The Xiao Dao nodded. Moreover, she's a very powerful swordsman. Yi Xian suddenly asked, Who's more powerful than the plain-dressed woman? The Xiao Dao suddenly punched Yi Xian's face. Chapter 1137. Bang! Yi Xian was directly sent flying, and this time, he flew as far as 1,000 feet. As soon as he stopped, a mouthful of blood essence sprayed from his mouth. All the women were speechless. Xiao Dao shook his head. I really couldn't restrain myself. At this moment, Yi Xian was quite stunned as well. That Xiao Dao was too ruthless. Didn't I just ask a question? She's really too violent. I'll never be able to get married in the future. Suddenly, the space above them split apart, and then a middle-aged man walked out from within it. The middle-aged man wore a black robe, and held a folding fan in his right hand. Moreover, an old man was following behind him. It was the black-clothed old man who'd left earlier. He's here again. Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. These fellows really don't know when to stop. Who's this fellow? Is he from this world? Or the Ascension Dimension? Yi Xian turned around to gaze at Xiao Dao. Xiao Dao glanced at the black-robed man. He's from the Ascension Dimension. They can descend here. They can descend here. Yi Xian gazed at the black-robed man. Since he was able to descend here, then it meant that he'd join forces with the Spirit of Yin. The Spirit of Yin. Yi Xian restrained his thoughts and gazed at Xiao Dao. Protect arrow. Xiao Dao nodded slightly. Suddenly the middle-aged man smiled. Don't worry, I won't take advantage of them. As he spoke, he glanced at Arrow and smiled. I'll wait for her to break through, and then I'll fight her. All the others gazed at the black-robed man when they heard this. Arrogance. Or confidence. The black-robed man suddenly gazed at Xiao Dao. And then he grinned. Miss Xiao Dao, we're very curious about you. Because according to our investigations, you don't seem to be from the 6th dimension. Xiao Dao spoke indifferently. It's pointless to investigate me. The black-robed man shook his head. No, it's very meaningful. Currently, there are 5 people who pose the greatest threat to us. The first is the woman in the plain dress who has already left. This person is able to break through the barrier of the universe and rush into the 6th dimension. With this kind of strength, there is no one in the upper realm who is his opponent. As he spoke, he paused for a moment before continuing. The second one is the woman in the white robe. Her clone instantly killed a venerable envoy from the upper realm. With this kind of strength, if her original body was here, no one from the upper realm would be able to fight against her. Xiao Dao looked at the black-robed man. Then why are you still here to kill him? The black-robed man smiled and said, I'll answer that question later, Miss Xiao Dao. The third person was none other than the heavenly Dao. We still don't know how strong this person is. Furthermore, this woman wants us to fight to the death with you in the upper realm. This is an open plot. Even though we know her plot, we can't do anything about it. Because the price of killing her was far too great. Moreover, he might not be able to kill it. And this fourth one. As he spoke, he looked at Xiao Dao. This fourth one is you, Miss Xiao Dao. According to our investigation, Miss Xiao Dao seems to have suffered some kind of injury. Right now, Miss Xiao Dao's strength should be less than 20% of what it used to be. If Miss Xiao Dao's strength completely recovers, no one in the upper realm would be a match for Miss Xiao Dao. Yi Xian suddenly said, Am I the 5th one? Everyone. The black-robed old man behind the black-robed man glanced at Yi Xian, and the corners of his eyes twitched. Damn it, why are people from the lower realm so thick-skinned? The black-robed man looked at. This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. Yi Xian smiled and said, You're not the 5th one. However, the 5 people who pose the greatest threat to us are all related to you. So, we were hesitating about whether we should continue to fight for this study room. Yi Xian smiled and said, It's obvious that you've decided to fight for it. The black-robed man nodded and said, We have no other choice. Let's talk about the 5th one first. This 5th one is the Sword Sect. Fortunately, they're being held back by the Darkeen tribe, and can't come here for the time being. Otherwise, we wouldn't even dare to come down. Xiao Dao suddenly said softly, Actually, there are a few more. The black-robed man looked at Xiao Dao and said, Miss Xiao Dao, please tell us. Xiao Dao shook her head and said, Since you've chosen to be his enemy, you won't care about this. As she spoke, she looked at the black-robed man and said, I'm very curious. Why do you insist on that study room? The black-robed man said softly, Miss Xiao Dao, how much do you know about the prophet? Xiao Dao shook her head and said, Not much. The black-robed man nodded and said, The first place he stayed was in the upper realm. Of course, he was just passing by. Xiao Dao frowned and said, What did he do there? The black-robed man said softly, He did us a great favor. If it wasn't for his help, we wouldn't have been able to resist the 6th dimension. Xiao Dao stared at the black-robed man and said, Then why did you still kill him? The black-robed man looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, To be precise, we only wanted that Xiao Ta and the study room. However, we knew that he wouldn't take the initiative to hand it over. As for why we did this, and why we targeted him, even though we knew that he had countless backers. As he spoke, he looked at Xiao Dao and said, Survival. Xiao Dao frowned and said, You can't survive in the upper realm? The black-robed man said softly, We've been fighting against the 6th dimension all these years. However, we still can't enter the 6th dimension. If we don't enter the 6th dimension, even we have to face the 5th dimension tribulation. Yi Xian suddenly asked, Why were you driven down? The black-robed man looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile. Because we wanted to change the model above. Yi Xian frowned and said, Isn't that model quite good? The black-robed man shook his head and said, That model indeed protects that part of the universe. However, have you thought about those people at the bottom? Many people are destined from birth. They can't cultivate and can't enjoy spiritual energy. They can only be ordinary people. It can be said that from birth, their lives are destined. They can't cultivate. However, others can cultivate. The people of the Union Palace and the super forces can cultivate. Moreover, their people can obtain good cultivation resources from birth. As he spoke, he smiled and said, The cultivation resources and qualifications in the sixth dimension are in the hands of the top forces. They are all people, but birth decides everything. Hard work, talent. Honestly, some people struggle their whole lives to pursue something, while some people get it the moment they are born. Do you think it's fair? Xiao Dao shook his head and said, Since you're talking about birth, then I have to say a few more words. Birth is not something we can decide, but our life is something we can decide. Bad birth? Why don't you fight for it? If you're not born well, and you're not willing to fight for it, then you're really done for. Moreover, forgive me for speaking bluntly. Since ancient times, many super experts were not born well at all. As she spoke, she looked at the black-robed man and said, Although the system in the sixth dimension is unfair to many people, without it, the sixth dimension would have already been destroyed, and the spiritual energy would have become sparse. It would have been on the verge of extinction, of course, for the people below. If this chapter is not finished, please continue. For those people, it is indeed unfair because they are born in that world, but they can't enjoy the spiritual energy of that world. They can't cultivate, they can't change their fate, and they can't create their own lives. At this point, she shook her head again and said, There is no right or wrong, and there is no such thing as true fairness. There is no such thing as absolute fairness. Everyone was silent. Fairness. This was something that they had to fight for themselves. Without strength, what kind of fairness were you thinking about? It was more like eating a fart. The black-robed man smiled and said, Miss Xiao Dao is right. There is no right or wrong between us and the sixth dimension. It's just that our standpoints are different. It's just like us and you. We came to snatch the study room, because we want to survive. Yi Xian suddenly shook his head and said, Don't make it sound so dignified. Snatching things is snatching things. It doesn't matter what your purpose is. Just like me, if I don't have a wife, can I snatch your wife? Chapter 1138. Martial Saint. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Dao. What martial saint? Xiao Dao said softly. The pinnacle of martial arts is martial saint. This kind of person is extremely rare, even in the sixth dimension. No wonder he dared to wait for Arrow to break through. He has the capital to do so. Yi Xian turned to look at the black-robed man and Arrow in the distance. The space they were in was very illusory, but it also felt very real. Both of them were in the shattering void tier. One was a swordsman. The other was a martial cultivator. At this time, Xiao Dao suddenly said softly, Watch carefully. It should give you a lot of inspiration. Yi Xian nodded. At this time, Arrow's left thumb flicked lightly, and the sword in her hand suddenly flew out. The sword instantly flew up, and then slashed at the black-robed man in an extremely graceful manner. The black-robed man slightly leaned to the side, and dodged the sword by a hair's breadth. At this time, an afterimage suddenly appeared in front of him. It was Arrow. The sword had returned to Arrow's hand at some unknown time, and she slashed horizontally, directly slashing at the black-robed man's throat. The black-robed man's body bent slightly backwards as if it was broken, and this bend directly caused Arrow's sword to cut through thin air. At the same time, his right foot lightly tapped, and his whole body instantly moved back 30 meters. He had just retreated when a sword light just happened to fall where he originally stood, and almost at the same instant that this sword light fell, another sword light appeared in front of him. Before the first sword was finished, another sword arrived. The black-robed man did not dodge this time, because it was already impossible to dodge. When Arrow attacked with the first sword, she had already predicted the following 3 sword lights. the black-robed man suddenly put his hands together. And with this, he directly blocked the sword light. However, in the next moment, 3 sword lights flickered around the black-robed man. And almost at the same time, 3 shadows of fists blasted on the 3 sword lights. Pung pung pung. With several muffled sounds, the two simultaneously retreated several dozen meters. After Arrow stopped, the sword in her hand suddenly flew out like a bolt of lightning. In the distance, the black-robed man blasted out a punch. Hong! The sword light stopped about 10 feet away from the black-robed man. The black-robed man lightly stomped his right foot, and his whole body suddenly shattered the sword light. The next moment, he was already in front of Arrow, and his fist was aimed at Arrow's head. This punch looked like an ordinary punch, without any energy fluctuations. At this time, Arrow suddenly became illusory. The black-robed man's fist struck empty air. Wherever his fist landed, the space there turned into nothingness, completely disappearing. The black-robed man abruptly moved sideways after his fist struck empty air. A ray of sword light brushed past his shoulder and slashed down. Almost at the instant the black-robed man moved sideways, the ray of sword light suddenly slashed horizontally. Chi! His sword missed. This was because the black-robed man had already retreated hundreds of feet away. He was floating in the air, and there was a shallow sword mark on his black robe. Meanwhile, Arrow suddenly walked towards the black-robed man with her sword in hand. As she walked, her body suddenly became illusory, as if she didn't exist at all. In the distance, the black-robed man suddenly clenched his right hand, and then his left palm pressed down lightly. As he pressed down, the space around him suddenly shook like a wave of air. Meanwhile, Arrow stopped moving. She gazed at the black-robed man, and then her figure vanished. The black-robed man's left hand suddenly pressed forward lightly, and at the same time, his right hand blasted out towards the right. Chi! Bang! 2 rays of sword light suddenly erupted from the right, and in front of the black-robed man. Meanwhile, the space around him suddenly trembled violently, and then an afterimage appeared in front of the black-robed man. It was Arrow. Chi! 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 In an instant, an expanse of rays of sword light crisscrossed through the space. It wasn't because there were many rays of sword light, but because Arrow's attacks were too fast. Before the first ray of sword light was finished, another ray of sword light followed. At this moment, outsiders couldn't see what was happening in that space, because the entire space was filled with rays of sword light. Yi Xian turned to look at Xiao Dao. Xiao Dao didn't speak, but his expression gradually became solemn. Noticing this, Yi Xian's expression also sank. At this moment, the space in the distance suddenly trembled violently, and then countless rays of sword light disappeared. At this moment, an afterimage retreated rapidly. That afterimage was Arrow. As she madly retreated, fists continued to appear in the space in front of Aluo. Each fist would force Aluo back dozens of feet. In just a few breaths of time, Aluo had retreated more than 10,000 feet, and the 10,000 feet of space in front of her was filled with fists. These fist prints stayed in the space for a long time without dispersing. After Arrow stopped, she suddenly raised her sword to block. A fist print slammed directly onto her sword. Bang! Arrow retreated by dozens of feet again. As soon as she stopped, another fist imprint appeared. At this moment, Aluo suddenly slashed his sword across his neck. Chi! In an instant, the fist print that had just appeared in front of her was reduced to nothingness. At the same time, all the fist prints that stayed in the space in front of Arrow instantly vanished. Immediately after that, the space in front of her suddenly split open. This split extended for thousands of feet, and at the end of that split space, a person appeared. It was the black-robed man. At this moment, there was a shallow sword mark between the black-robed man's brows, and this sword mark just happened to cut open his skin. It wasn't fatal, but it was disfiguring. The black-robed old man's expression became unprecedentedly serious when he saw this scene. This was the first time he'd seen the black-robed man suffer a loss. In the distance, the black-robed man touched his forehead and looked at the blood on his fingertips. He chuckled lightly, and then he looked at Arrow. What a powerful sword strike! Arrow's face was expressionless as she walked towards the black-robed man. At this moment, the black-robed man suddenly said, "Even if the two of us fought for 10 days, we still wouldn't be able to tell the difference between life and death." Arrow stopped and looked at the black-robed man. "You can call for help." The black-robed man smiled slightly. "This person definitely has to be called, but not now. This time, I came mainly to personally understand your strength." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. "And you?" Yi Xian smiled. "Understand me?" The black-robed man nodded. "Yi Xian, that study can't display its true value in your hands. If you're willing to give it to us, you can choose any treasure in the upper realms." Yi Xian opened his palm, and the executing heaven sword appeared in it. "Is there a treasure in the upper realms that's better than this?" The black-robed man glanced at the executing heaven sword and shook his head. Yi Xian took out the soul-suppressing sword and the Taiji shield. "Is there a treasure in the upper realms that's better than this?" The black-robed man fell silent. Yi Xian took out the World Prism Pagoda. "Is there a treasure in the upper realms that's better than this?" The black-robed man looked at Yi Xian. "Are you flaunting your wealth in front of me?" Yi Xian smiled. "Look, if you want a sword, I have the sharpest sword. If you want a shield, I have the hardest shield. Tell me, why should I trade with you? Or do you think that I, Yi Xian, am stupid?" The black-robed man smiled. "We will meet again." As he spoke, he and the black-robed old man became illusory. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Dao. "Can you make them stay?" Xiao Dao shook his head. At this time, the black-robed man and the black-robed man had already disappeared. In the square, Yi Xian looked up at the sky with an expressionless face. He was too passive. He could only take a beating. He had no initiative at all. This was not good at all. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Can we go up?" Xiao Dao looked at Yi Xian. "You want to go up?" Yi Xian nodded. Xiao Dao shook his head. "Not now. My strength doesn't allow me to." Yi Xian was about to speak when the Tendo suddenly appeared again. Everyone looked at the Tendo. The Tendo looked at Yi Xian. She smiled. "I'll take you somewhere. Do you want to go?" "Go somewhere?" Yi Xian frowned. "What place?" The Tendo smiled. "You'll know when you get there. Let me tell you. There are benefits." Yi Xian looked at the Tendo. "You're not trying to scam me, are you?" The Tendo blinked. "You can say that." Yi Xian was speechless. The Tendo continued. "But there are really benefits." Yi Xian asked, "What benefits?" The Tendo smiled. "Are you going?" Yi Xian pondered for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going." Anyway, he was barefooted, so he wasn't afraid of those who wore shoes. Who's afraid of who? The Tendo smiled. "Let's go." With that, she turned and left. At this moment, Xiao Dao suddenly appeared in front of the Tendo. "I'll go with you." The Tendo smiled. "Xiao Dao, you'd better hurry up and recuperate. It's not just them. You're in danger too. After all, you haven't fully recovered your strength." At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly took out some purple gas and gave it to Xiao Dao. He smiled. "Miss Xiao Dao, you should recuperate first. If she wanted to harm me, she wouldn't have used such tricks." Xiao Dao glanced at the Tendo and nodded. As Yi Xian said, the Tendo would not harm Yi Xian in a short time, because without Yi Xian, she would have to face the upper realm by herself. Moreover, killing Yi Xian would not do her any good. Xiao Dao put away the purple gas, while Yi Xian and the Tendo disappeared in the distant sky. In the field, Arrow suddenly said, "Too passive." Xiao Dao looked at Arrow. Arrow said softly, "This world is not fun anymore." "Everyone." Xiao Dao took a deep look at Arrow. She knew that Arrow wanted to see the outside world. After all, Arrow had reached the peak of this world. It was normal for him to yearn for the outside world. In the distant sky, Yi Xian followed the Tendo and slowly walked forward. After a while, the two came to a starry sky. The Tendo looked around and said softly, "Look how beautiful this starry sky is." Yi Xian's expression was a little strange. Did this woman bring him to see the scenery? The Tendo smiled softly and said, "In the beginning, this world was more beautiful. Unfortunately, you have not seen it." Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Miss Tendo, how was this universe formed?" The Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said, "You asked this question." Yi Xian asked again, "You don't know?" The Tendo shook her head and said, "The origin of the universe is not something we should worry about." Yi Xian suddenly asked, "What about the origin of life? How did the first life come about? Do you know?" The Tendo looked at Yi Xian and slowly clenched her right hand. Chapter 1139. Seeing Tendo clenching her fists, Yi Xian's expression changed, and he quickly said, "I won't ask anymore." Tiandao blinked. "Are you really not going to ask?" Yi Xian nodded. "I won't ask anymore." His intuition told him that this woman in front of him definitely wanted to hit him. Tendo smiled and said, "Actually, these questions you asked are also what I want to know." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "You don't know either?" Tendo nodded. "I'm not omniscient." Saying that, she walked into the distance. She glanced at the starry sky in front of her and said softly, "Before I appeared, this universe already existed." Yi Xian was silent. Tendo pointed at the planets in the distance and said softly, "Look, these countless planets in this universe are rotating on their own in a regular pattern. There are also all living things. If you look carefully, you will find that everything is operating and developing according to a certain pattern. The sun sets and rises, the tides rise and fall. The four seasons change: birth, aging, sickness, and death." Saying that, she looked at Yi Xian. "Someone once told me that this is the Tao. The Tao is natural, and the Tao is ever-changing. However, how does this Tao exist? Is it natural or man-made? If it exists naturally, then how did this universe form? Who was the first life in this universe? How was it formed?" Yi Xian was silent. Tendo said again, "Great Tao, karma, fate. Who was the one who first proposed these? Speaking of fate, birth, aging, sickness, and death, is this the fate of all living things? Not to mention humans. Even an entire universe would one day perish. Many people say that they want to defy the heavens and change their fate. Since ancient times, who can truly reverse life and death?" Saying that, she looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "All living things in the universe have their own fate." "What do you mean by changing fate? Don't you know that the fate you should change is also your own fate?" Yi Xian suddenly asked, "What about the woman in the plain dress?" Tendo was silent. Yi Xian looked at Tendo and said, "I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm just asking." The Tendo said softly, "She has gone too far." Yi Xian was puzzled. "What do you mean?" The Tendo chuckled and said, "She has already embarked on the Great Tao." "Walk out of the Great Tao," Yi Xian said in a low voice. "Release one?" Tendo nodded. "Currently, the highest realm known in our universe is solitary release. Solitary release is not within the Great Tao, and is not bound by fate and karma. Only when one reaches this level can it be considered true freedom. However, because of you, she jumped in again. Of course, her behavior is against the rules. After jumping out, she jumped back in. This is very unfair to those of us who are still within the rules. It's like a scholar going to a private school to study with those children. It's not fair." Yi Xian was speechless. The Tendo said, "However, she also has her own troubles, and her troubles should be related to you." Yi Xian said softly, "Xiao Dao said that it's my karma." The Tendo nodded slightly. "You have great karma, karma that doesn't belong to this world." Yi Xian looked at the Tendo and said, "Miss Tendo, why are you telling me so much?" The Tendo smiled and said, "There's no other reason. I'm just chatting." Yi Xian suddenly asked, "You want to protect this universe, right?" The Tendo nodded. "Yes. The mistakes of all living things should not be borne by this universe." Yi Xian looked at the Tendo and said, "The fifth dimension has nothing to do with you?" The Tendo smiled and said, "Don't think too much about it. I still don't have the ability to create a fifth dimension. Don't care too much about the living things of this universe, especially the humans. From the point of view of a bystander, don't you think that the actions of humans and many other races really deserve to die?" Yi Xian was silent. The Tendo said softly, "Among all the races, humans are the most greedy. In order to plunder, they are willing to do anything. The appearance of the fifth dimension is the universe's way of protecting itself. Regarding this, I can only say that all living things deserve to be punished." As she said this, she glanced at Yi Xian and said, "Don't think about stopping this fifth dimension. Let alone you. Even that plainly dressed woman can't stop it. If you stop it, the universe will be destroyed. and all living things in this universe will die. Yi Xian was silent, and his heart was filled with complex emotions. Fifth dimension tribulation. This tribulation was caused by this universe. If he wanted to stop this tribulation, he had to destroy this universe. And destroying this universe was equivalent to destroying all living things. Leaving this universe. This was the only choice for all living things in this universe. As if she knew what Yi Xian was thinking, the Tendo suddenly said, "Leaving this universe is indeed a good choice. But how many people can leave this universe? Do they have the ability? Even if everyone has the ability to leave, where can they go? Go to the sixth dimension? Do they welcome you?" As she said this, she paused and then said, "Rather than placing your hopes on other universes, why not properly protect this universe?" As she said this, she seemed to have thought of something, and shook her head with a smile. Actually, people are selfish. For example, the first group of human experts. Their thinking was very simple. In any case, as long as I'm alive, it's fine as long as the universe isn't destroyed. As for after I die, who cares if a flood overflows the heavens? To put it simply, the ancestors enjoy a blessing, while the descendants suffer a calamity. Yi Xian softly said, "Is there really no other way?" The Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said, "Do you want to save all living things in this universe?" Yi Xian looked up. In that starry sky, he saw a bamboo house. The bamboo house was floating in the starry sky. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo. The Tendo smiled and said, "This is where I live." After saying this, she brought Yi Xian to the front of the bamboo house. On the bamboo door, there were two small words, "Elegant Residence." Elegant Residence. Yi Xian softly said, "This name is elegant and small." The Tendo smiled and said, "In countless years, you are the second person to come to this bamboo house." Yi Xian asked, "Who was the first?" The Tendo faintly smiled and said, "The Prophet." "The Prophet?" Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "He came here." The Tendo nodded and said, "He came here. He chatted with me for a while. I have to say, he is a very knowledgeable person. In terms of fighting, he certainly can't beat the plain-dressed woman. However, in terms of understanding of this world, I feel that no one can compare to him." After saying this, she brought Yi Xian into the bamboo house. After entering the bamboo house, Yi Xian discovered that there were huge bookshelves inside the bamboo house. On these bookshelves, there were countless ancient books. Yi Xian was shocked by the scene in front of him. The Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "Surprised?" Yi Xian nodded. Tiandao pointed at the ancient books and said with a smile, "These ancient books were created by the various races. They contain knowledge, and are very, very interesting. Unfortunately, many races, including your human race, don't care about the knowledge and culture of their ancestors at all. They only care about some cultivation ancient books or secret techniques and mystiques. Actually, in my opinion, those humanities, history, and academic studies are more interesting." Yi Xian looked at the Tendo and said, "What do you mean?" The Tendo smiled and said, "Let me ask you a question. What is the structure of space?" Yi Xian was stunned. The Tendo smiled and said, "See that? You have the space Dao law, and can use space. However, you don't understand space much. You are all learning the form and not the essence." As she spoke, she paused before continuing, "I admire the Prophet because everyone else is cultivating the Tao, cultivating immortality, cultivating the sword. Only he is cultivating, of course. It is quite tragic for him, because he schemed against someone he should not have schemed against. As such, the one who cultivates is killed by the one who cultivates the sword." After saying this, she looked at Yi Xian and said, "This cruel fact tells us that no matter what we cultivate, we must have great strength. Otherwise, it will all be for nothing. So ever since he died, I started to repair everything." Yi Xian was speechless. P.S. Recently, the editor asked me that my monthly votes seem to be a little low. Is there something wrong with me? I said that the readers don't go to work and are short of money, so I don't have monthly votes. Chapter 1140. Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Are you a swordsman?" Tendo smiled and said, "You can say so." Yi Xian hesitated and then said, "Let's spar." Tendo shook her head. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. Why? Tendo chuckled. I cultivate the killing sword Dao. My sword is only for the purpose of taking lives. If I spar with you, your cultivation is not high enough. It will be difficult for you to resist. Yi Xian hurriedly said. My body is very strong. Tendo shook her head. In this world, there are indeed not many people who can break your body, but this person in front of you can. Yi Xian. Tendo sized up Yi Xian's body and then said, Actually, your body is not strong at all. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. What do you mean? Tendo suddenly pointed a finger at Yi Xian's chest. In an instant, Yi Xian's expression changed greatly, and he hurriedly retreated. When he stopped, he looked at his chest. At this moment, the skin on his chest was disintegrating bit by bit. At this moment, Tendo withdrew her finger, and Yi Xian's body instantly returned to normal. Yi Xian looked at Tendo and said in shock, What kind of divine ability is this? Tendo smiled and said, It's not a divine ability, just a simple finger. Yi Xian shook his head. A simple finger can't break my body. Tendo smiled and then said, You still know nothing about power. Yi Xian. Tiandao suddenly said. Actually, the martial arts in this world can be divided into 3 realms. The first realm is to go from nothing to something. The second realm is to go from something to nothing. The third realm is to go from something to nothing. Saying that, she looked at Yi Xian. Do you understand what I mean? Yi Xian blinked. I understand, but I still want to hear your explanation. Tendo shook her head. What do you understand? Yi Xian. Tendo sat in front of Yi Xian. She took out a small roasted fish and gently took a bite, then said, Let me give you an example. For example, when you first start to cultivate the sword, you only know a little bit of sword Dao. At this time, the sword Dao moves you see are simple moves. In other words, the so-called mountain is a mountain, the water is water. But when your martial arts reach a certain level, the sword Dao moves you see are no longer simple sword Dao moves. It may be a kind of sword Dao principle, a kind of sword Dao concept, a kind of sword Dao concept, a kind of sword Dao life. This is, the mountain is not a mountain, the water is not water. As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, When you reach the peak, the swordsmanship will no longer be a simple swordsmanship. Others will not be able to tell that you know the swordsmanship at all. This is what it means to return to one's natural state. Mountains are still mountains and water is still water. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, What realm am I in now? Tendo said with a smile, You have reached all 3 realms. Yi Xian was stunned, then said, Is there a but? Tendo blinked. Correct. Although you have reached all 3 realms. But you have not comprehended any of the realms, so strictly speaking, you have not reached all 3 realms. Yi Xian said in a low voice, Is it really that serious? Tendo smiled, then continued, Arrow has not reached the realm of sword Dao. Qingqing Yi family ancestral temple. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as the crown prince is removed. Yi Lang will succeed. The one who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a young man. The young man had a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. And on both sides were the Yi family elders. Why? At this time, a timid voice suddenly rang out in the ancestral temple. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the family wanted to remove Yi Xian, she rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral temple, and said timidly, Great elder, my brother Yi Xian is the crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The great elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. This is a family matter. What are you interrupting for? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, not daring to look at the great elder, but she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and entered the ancestral temple. Once again, she bowed to the elders. Dear elders, My brother is fighting with the Li family over the mining rights at Nanshan. He's fighting for the family, and it's unknown whether he's dead or alive. Yet, the family is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. Whether he's crippled or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new crown prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder coldly replied. Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi family guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered. Young Master Yi Lang inherits the crown prince's position, and it's everyone's wish. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she didn't cry, and only clutched her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard quickly bowed. This subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I'll need 10 personal guards. From now on, you'll be my personal guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the crown prince, and I'm willing to die 1,000 deaths. Yi Lang nodded. Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back. Understood. Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was dressed in a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders were frowning. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Bang! Zhang Mu's head spun, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared. Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, Your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me! Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu, and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Peng! Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look, and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the hall and asked timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave. Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. This is truly unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. Whether or not he's crippled, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered. Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of prince. What are you shouting for? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. But she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard quickly bowed. This subordinate, Zhang Mu, greets the prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince, even if it means death. Yi Lang nodded. Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there. He rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared. Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, Your man? As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me! Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 1141. Refuse. Yi Xian's face was as gloomy as water. At this moment, his heart was incomparably complicated. This woman is clearly saying that she wants to make use of you. However, this is beneficial to her, at least for the time being. Refuse? He really couldn't think of a reason to refuse. Not refuse. If he didn't refuse, he was a bit unwilling. But soon, this kind of unwillingness disappeared without a trace. Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, I think what you said just now is very reasonable. Tendo blinked. Which one? Yi Xian said seriously. You said looking at things from a different angle. I suddenly feel that you don't want to use me at all. You just see that I have talent, think that I have value, and want to invest in me, so that I can help you protect the fifth dimension in the future. Tendo blinked and froze. Yi Xian went on. To put it simply, it's because I, Yi Xian, am excellent enough. That's why you want to help me, and build a good relationship with me. Tendo was silent for a moment and then said, I suddenly feel a bit regretful. Yi Xian. Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, Actually, you are quite amazing really. Let's not talk about other aspects. Just in terms of face, I admit that I am inferior. Throughout the ages, I found that no one's face can compare to yours. Yi Xian. Tendo said again. Let's not worry about this problem. This time, I asked you to come because I want to improve you. Do you want to start with the sword path or the body? Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, What do you think? Tendo said softly. In terms of sword path, it is difficult to solve it in a few words. Let's first cultivate the body. First, we will improve your body so that you won't die so easily. Yi Xian was speechless. Tendo opened her palm, and an ancient book suddenly flew out from the bookshelf behind her. She handed the ancient book to Yi Xian. This is the experience of some cultivators from ancient to modern times. Take a good look at it, understand it thoroughly, and then we will begin. This way, if you encounter any problems during your cultivation, you will know how to deal with it, and also know what to do to benefit yourself. Yi Xian nodded. He opened the ancient book, and as he read, his expression became solemn. The Tendo smiled and said, Is it useful? Yi Xian said solemnly, Of great use. With that he continued reading. Needless to say, even though he was a body cultivator, he didn't know much about the path of body cultivators. After reading the cultivation experiences of these former body cultivators, he realized that he'd thought too simply of the path of body cultivators. Body cultivator. It wasn't just about cultivating the body, but also cultivating the soul. What did a powerful physical body need to be supported? Divine soul. To be strong on the outside, one must be strong on the inside. In addition, there were many kinds of body cultivators, at least hundreds of schools, and these schools' cultivation methods were different. Some focused on the skin and flesh, some focused on the muscles and bones, some focused on the internal organs. Very few could take care of all. After about an hour, Yi Xian put down the ancient book in his hand. At this time, the Tendo was no longer in the bamboo house. Yi Xian got up and walked outside the bamboo house. The Tendo was roasting fish in the yard. Yi Xian walked in front of the Tendo. She glanced at the small fish and said with a smile, I thought you didn't know how to kill. The Tendo glanced at it. Qingcheng, Yi family ancestral temple. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as the crown prince will be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a young man with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi family's elders. Why? At this time, a timid voice suddenly sounded in the ancestral temple. Everyone turned to look, and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. The little girl was called Yi Ling. She was Yi Xian's sister. When she heard that the family wanted to remove Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral temple and said timidly, Great elder, My brother Yi Xian is the crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The great elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. This is a family matter. What are you interrupting for? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, and did not dare to look at the great elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage, and walked into the ancestral temple. She bowed again to the elders on both sides. Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li family over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet, the family is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men drag her away. At this time, the new crown prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder coldly replied. Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi family's guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years. Even now he is fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered. Young Master Yi Lang inherits the crown prince's position. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded. Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she didn't cry. She just held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. This subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I'll need 10 personal guards. You can be my personal guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He hurriedly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded slightly. Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something and suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes. His face was dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this moment, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt his head spin, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there. He rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared. Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, Your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me! Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu. As he walked to Yi Ling's side, seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being cut by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. Brother, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, There were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall and asked timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid and did not dare to look at the Great Elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. Once again, she bowed to the elders. Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan for the rights to the mine. He is fighting for the clan, and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered. Young Master Yi Lang inherits the prince's position, and it's everyone's wish. What are you shouting for? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and said with a smile, What's your name? The guard quickly bowed. This subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the prince, I'll need 10 personal guards. From now on, you'll be my personal guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through water and tread on fire for the prince, even if it means death. Yi Lang nodded. Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Inside the ancestral hall, all the elders frowned. The Great Elder's eyes narrowed, and his face darkened. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and he charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, Your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me! Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 1142. Half a month. At this moment, Yi Xian really wanted to die. However, he still gritted his teeth and held on. Just like what Tendo said, if he didn't hold on, did he really have to let others help him? Thinking of this, Yi Xian gradually calmed down. Wasn't it just physical pain? What's the big deal? Yi Xian suddenly opened her eyes and looked at Tendo, roaring. "That's it? Is there anything more powerful?" Tendo blinked her eyes. "Of course there is." Saying that, she waved her right hand, and from the depths of the lightning pool, pitch-black divine lightning suddenly swam up like little snakes. Sensing the black divine lightning, Yi Xian's expression instantly changed. She hurriedly said, "F***CK, big sister, don't. I was just joking. Ah, I was wrong." At the side of the lightning pool, Tendo squatted down and looked at Yi Xian, her face full of smiles. Within the lightning pool, Yi Xian's screams could be heard. He also wanted to not scream. After all, this was really a bit embarrassing, but he really couldn't bear it. This was too painful. At this moment, Yi Xian's immortal body had already been broken, but for some reason, the divine lightning didn't damage his physical body. Of course, at this moment he couldn't care so much anymore. After a long time, Tendo already started to roast fish. She would occasionally glance at Yi Xian in the lightning pool. And within the lightning pool, Yi Xian was already like a man of lightning. His entire body was emitting lightning. At this moment, Xiao Dao suddenly appeared beside Tendo. Tendo smiled. "You don't feel at ease with him?" Xiao Dao looked at Tendo. "Many times, I have been thinking, what would happen if you gave up on this universe?" Tendo suddenly became quiet. After a moment, Tendo smiled. "What would happen if you gave up on hatred?" "Hatred?" Xiao Dao suddenly clenched her fists, her expression incomparably cold. "How can I give up on blood hatred? But you are different from me." The Tendo chuckled. "The essence is the same. There are always some things that people can't let go of. If we can let go of everything, what's the point of living?" After a moment of silence, Xiao Dao said softly, "I feel that you can go to a bigger stage. You are the spirit of the Tendo no matter where you go." The Tendo suddenly interrupted Xiao Dao. "This is home." Xiao Dao looked at Tendo. Tendo chuckled and said, "This is the place where I was born and raised." Xiao Dao was silent. Tendo turned his head and looked at the pool of lightning. He said softly, "He is a good seedling. Unfortunately, fate plays tricks on people. So much karma has been imposed on him. To him it is unfair." Xiao Dao looked at Yi Xian. "But this karma also brought him benefits, didn't it?" The Tendo suddenly said, "Have you ever thought about it? If there was no karma, he would be himself without any support. What do you think his life would be like?" After a moment of silence, Xiao Dao said, "He wouldn't be too bad, but he wouldn't be as good as he is now." The Tendo shook his head. "You're wrong." Xiao Dao looked at Tendo. Tendo smiled. "Without those karma, he can go further." Xiao Dao looked straight at the Tendo. "Are you talking about his talent and temperament?" "His talent is not bad, and his temperament is also top-notch. However, without those people, there are many things that he wouldn't have been able to come into contact with. In other words, it's not something that he can come into contact with now. Think about it. How many swordsmen can get pointers from someone who has reached the peak of swordsmanship from the start?" She paused, then continued, "Regardless of whether we admit it or not, just like what that person from the upper realm said, there is a fact, and that is one's birth is very important. Some people work their whole lives to get what they have, while others are born with it." The Tendo smiled. "What you said is very reasonable, but you've overlooked one thing." Xiao Dao looked at the Tendo. "Please advise me." The Tendo turned to look at Yi Xian in the lightning pool and smiled. "Do you know what happened to him in Green City?" Xiao Dao said softly. "I do." The Tendo smiled. The plain-dressed woman should have recognized him long ago. But she didn't choose to meet him from the start and teach him swordsmanship. Do you know why? Xiao Dao narrowed his eyes. You're saying that she's testing him? The Tendo shook his head. She should be letting him choose his own life. If he's willing to be ordinary, or if his temperament isn't good, the plain-dressed woman should give him a life of wealth, and then leave quietly. Is this path of martial Dao something that ordinary people can walk? No, it's not something that ordinary people can walk. And the plain-dressed woman chose to come forward. Obviously, she wants him to walk this endless path. Why does the plain-dressed woman think that he can walk this path? Xiao Dao was silent. The Tendo smiled. Since ancient times, a true peerless powerhouse can't do without one thing. This thing is not talent but hard work. They don't admit defeat, they dare to fight. They can endure hardships that ordinary people can't, and they have a firm mind. He fits these requirements, so the plain-dressed woman brought him on this path. Otherwise, do you really think that her sword can't cut off the karma on him? Not to mention the prophet's karma, even his mother. At this point she suddenly frowned. In the next moment, a trace of blood slowly flowed from the corner of her mouth. Xiao Dao's expression changed. You. The Tendo wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and smiled. I've spoken too much. Xiao Dao said in a deep voice. She did it? The Tendo shook his head and smiled. It's not the plain-dressed woman. It's another source of karma. Xiao Dao frowned. Isn't his mother Dugu Xian? The Tendo asked in return. Then where is she now? Hearing this, Xiao Dao was stunned. The Tendo smiled. He's much more complicated than we think. Not to mention anything else, I know why his mother disappeared. Because if she doesn't disappear, she will die. Just like the prophet back then. Do you really think that the prophet wants to disappear? No, he doesn't want to disappear at all. Who doesn't want to live? Of course, he's not that lucky. He must disappear because he has gone too far. Moreover, he has severely underestimated the plain-dressed woman's strength. This woman watches everything coldly from the sidelines. But when it's time to act, she doesn't show any mercy. As she said this, she looked up at the sky and said softly, have you noticed that this vast starry sky is like a huge chessboard, and all living beings are the chess pieces? Hearing this, Xiao Dao's expression gradually became solemn. The Tendo smiled and said, as the saying goes, the Tendo is heartless and treats all living beings as straw dogs. Actually, humans have some misunderstandings about this saying. This universe, which is also this heaven and earth, treats all living beings the same. It doesn't treat anyone especially good or especially bad. Everything develops naturally. In other words, no matter what happens to all living beings, it's all their own actions, including luck. All of this has nothing to do with heaven and earth. Heaven and earth let nature take its course. The ones who really interfere with the fate of all living beings are humans themselves. As she said this, she looked at Xiao Dao. Humans are becoming stronger and stronger. They are strong enough to destroy the universe and change the rules. Some even stronger experts can decide the life and death of all living beings with a single thought. Some people use heaven and earth as a chessboard and all living beings as chess pieces, trampling on all living beings. At the end of the day, humans are playing with themselves. It has nothing to do with heaven and earth. Xiao Dao turned to look at Yi Xian in the lightning pool and fell silent. The Tendo suddenly smiled and said, I suddenly feel a little emotional. This universe nourishes all living beings in the universe, but in the end, there won't be a good result. Of course, this involves ethics and human nature, so I won't say more. After a moment of silence, Xiao Dao turned and left. At this moment, the Tendo suddenly said, Xiao Dao. Xiao Dao turned to look at the Tendo. The Tendo smiled slightly. Perhaps we won't meet again soon. Now I want to give you a message. Do you want to hear it? Xiao Dao nodded. Speak. The Tendo said softly, kindness. The little Taoist smiled and said, do you want me to be kind? The Tendo nodded. Those who are kind should not be contaminated with evil karma. Xiao Dao was silent for a moment and nodded. I'll remember it. After saying this, she turned and disappeared into the horizon. The Tendo picked up the roasted fish in front of her and gently nibbled on it. About 10 days later, Yi Xian in the lightning pool had calmed down. He didn't roar anymore. Beside the lightning pool, the Tendo sized up Yi Xian. She waved her right hand, and in an instant, the lightning retreated like the tide. Around Yi Xian, countless lightning flashed. He looked like a man made of lightning. At this moment, Yi Xian opened his eyes. 2 lightning flashed in his eyes. Before these 2 lightning bolts could reach the Tendo, they disappeared without a trace. Yi Xian was a little excited. Is it done? The Tendo shook her head. This is just the first step. You still have many more steps to take. Now feel your body. Yi Xian nodded. He clenched his fists. In an instant, a powerful lightning swept out from his body. The surrounding space was directly shattered by these lightning bolts. Not only that, he felt some changes in his body. There were many small lightning spots on his body. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo. The Tendo smiled. Your body already has the lightning attribute. Now you are immune to all lightning. Yi Xian frowned. Immune to all lightning? The Tendo nodded. Not only are you immune to all lightning, but you can also absorb all the lightning attribute power. In the future, any heavenly tribulation will be like a tonic to you. Moreover, it's a tonic. And the kind that is very nutritious. Yi Xian blinked. So powerful? The Tendo smiled. Of course. However, it is far from enough. Come, let's go somewhere else. Yi Xian frowned. I haven't mastered it yet. The Tendo shook his head. Far from it. Although your body has strengthened a lot, it is still far from enough. Moreover, it is useless to have a strong body. You also need something special. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. What special? The corner of the Tendo's mouth curled up. Overlord body. Yi Xian frowned. Overlord body? Tiandao smiled and said, you can absorb the thunder attribute now. But if you can also absorb the fire attribute, water attribute, earth attribute. That's right. I want to forge you into a 5 elements extreme physique that no one has ever cultivated before. The 5 elements extreme body will be invulnerable. You will absorb whatever comes. Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 1143. 5 Elements Extreme Physique. Yi Xian's blood was boiling. If what Tendo said was true, wouldn't this physique be invincible? He would absorb everything that came his way. Plus, he was already a sword physique. Yi Xian's blood was boiling at the thought of this. Yi Xian thought of something and looked at Tendo. Has anyone cultivated it before? Tendo shook her head. No one. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? The heavenly Tao blinked. Because this was invented by me, so no one has cultivated it before. Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he said, I'm the first one? Tendo nodded. Yi Xian was speechless. Tendo smiled. You can reject it. I won't force you. After all, it is dangerous. However, if you succeeded in cultivating it, it would be very, very powerful. Think about it. All the divine powers and spells are within the 5 elements. If you cultivate the 5 elements extreme physique, how many people can hurt you? Other than that, I can also strengthen your sword body and your deadening spirit body. In fact, I can even research and use my resources to help you strengthen some other attributes, such as sabers, spears, etc. After all, I am quite proficient in these things. Of course. She looked at Yi Xian and said seriously, you can reject it. After all, it is dangerous. I can understand. Yi Xian's mouth twitched. Reject. At this moment he wanted to beat someone up. This woman was invincible. Tendo blinked. Cultivate? Yi Xian hesitated. Since you want me to cultivate it so strongly, then let's cultivate it. Tendo was puzzled. I don't want it so strongly. It is up to you whether to cultivate it or not. You. Yi Xian suddenly said seriously. Don't say it. I understand. I understand. Deep down you want me to cultivate it. After all, there are very few people as outstanding as me in this world. Without me, you won't be able to find anyone else suitable. Sai, we have known each other for a long time. How can I not help you? I'll fix it. Tendo was dumbfounded. Was that so? Yi Xian suddenly grabbed the Tendo's arm and said, don't worry about these small problems. Come on, let's go cultivate. Tendo. After a while, Tendo brought Yi Xian to the top of a volcano. Yixian bent down and looked down. Below him was boiling lava. Yixian looked at Tendo. Normal fire might not work on me. Tendo smiled and said, I know, there is a mysterious flame at the bottom of the magma. Yixian's eyes lit up. What flame? Tendo looked down and said softly, Heavenly flame. Heavenly flame? Yixian was puzzled. What kind of fire is that? Tendo smiled and said, At the beginning of chaos, some mysterious flames came from beyond the heavens, so it is called heavenly flame. Yixian pointed to the upper realm. Flames from above? Tendo shook her head and smiled. Not really. Anyway, it's from beyond the heavens. Yixian asked again. Where is beyond the heavens? Tendo looked at Yixian and raised her fist. Do you know how powerful my punch is? Yixian's expression changed, and he quickly shook his head. I don't know. Tendo's lips curled up slightly. Do you want to know? Yixian shook his head. I don't want to know. Tendo smiled and pointed below. Go down. Yixian looked down. This time, he did not hesitate, and directly jumped into the magma. Boom. The moment he jumped in, the magma shot out and instantly drowned Yixian. In the magma, Yixian looked at his body. His body was completely fine. Just as he said, ordinary flames had no effect on him. At this moment, from the depths of the magma, a blue flame suddenly rushed out and directly entered his chest. Boom! In an instant, Yixian's entire body directly burned. Yixian's eyes were wide open. At this moment, he felt that his body was about to turn into ashes. And at this moment, Tendo suddenly opened her palm. In her palm, an ice lotus the size of a thumb appeared. She bent her finger, and the ice lotus turned into a white light, and appeared above Yixian's head. The moment the ice lotus appeared, the flames on Yixian's body immediately dimmed, but they did not disappear. At this moment, Yixian was in even more pain. If it was said that he was burning in a raging fire before, now he was slowly stewing over a small fire. Yixian clenched his teeth and stubbornly held on. He was still able to endure physical pain. In the sky, Tendo glanced at Yixian. Then she took out an ancient book and sat down to read. Just as she said, she never forced Yixian. Yixian could give up at any time. Whether he gave up or persevered, it all depended on Yixian. Below, within Yixian's body, a flame was constantly roaming. This flame did not destroy his body. Instead, it was slowly merging with him, just like the divine lightning. Of course, this was because of Tendo. Without Tendo, if he dared to let this heavenly flame enter his body, he would be courting death. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. About 10 days later, Yixian's body had already turned into a ball of blue flame. Under this ball of flame, the magma around him had already started to disappear bit by bit, and the rest of the magma did not dare to approach him. At this moment, Yixian suddenly opened his eyes. In his eyes, 2 flames burst out. In the next moment, he directly turned into a flame and soared into the sky. At this moment, Tendo was no longer at the top of the volcano. In the sky, Yixian glanced around. In the end, he directly turned into a flame and disappeared on the spot. By a river, Yixian found Tendo. Tendo was catching fish. As soon as Yixian reached the river water directly boiled. At the same time, the surroundings directly burned, including the space. At this moment, Tendo suddenly appeared in front of Yixian. In the next moment, she and Yixian directly appeared at the top of the volcano. Tendo looked at Yixian. You can't control this flame yet. As she spoke, her right hand lightly pressed on Yixian's shoulder. Boom! The flame in Yixian's body was directly suppressed. Tendo said again, whether it is the divine lightning or the heavenly flame, it is not something that you can control perfectly now. Yixian said in a deep voice, then what should we do? Tendo smiled and said, we can let them restrain each other. Yixian was a little puzzled. What do you mean? Tendo smiled and said, the 5 elements reinforce and restrain each other. Do you understand? Hearing this, Yixian understood. 5 elements extreme body. He still lacked a few other types. Tendo said softly, let's go. After speaking, she turned and left. About half an hour later, Yi Xian followed Tendo to the top of a snowy mountain. Tendo led Yi Xian towards the depths of the snowy mountain. Although it was bone-chilling all around, Yi Xian still felt hot all over his body. He knew that it was because of the heavenly flame. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, Tendo suddenly stopped and pointed at an ice cave not far in front of them. Tendo smiled and said, "Let's go in." Yi Xian looked at the ice cave and asked, "What is inside?" Tendo smiled and said, "Ice soul." Yi Xian was about to ask when Tendo suddenly said, "Ice soul is a kind of spirit cultivated from ice. This ice soul is the first one in our fifth dimension, and also the last one. This is because the spiritual qi in this universe is not enough to cultivate an ice soul." Yi Xian asked, "Why?" Tendo smiled and said, "Because the spiritual qi is not enough. Moreover, most of the spiritual qi has been absorbed by humans. Just like here, how much spiritual qi is left here?" Yi Xian looked around. The spiritual qi in this place was extremely thin. It was not suitable for cultivation. Tendo pointed at the ice cave and said, "Go in." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Miss Tendo, I have absorbed the fire soul and ice soul. Do they still exist?" Tendo nodded and said, "Naturally they will coexist with you. In the future, if you go further and do not need them, promise me that you will give them a good home. It is not easy." Yi Xian looked at Tendo and nodded. "Okay," Tendo said with a smile, "Go in." Yi Xian nodded and walked into the ice cave. Just as he entered the ice cave, a white light suddenly flew towards him. Yi Xian was about to resist, but the white light directly entered between his eyebrows. Boom! Yi Xian's body trembled violently. The next moment, his body started to freeze bit by bit. Yi Xian did not panic. Just as his body was about to completely freeze, the heavenly fire appeared again. Soon, the coldness on his body dissipated a bit. Ice and fire collided. Outside the ice cave, Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said, "Guide them and let them reach a perfect balance in your body. As long as you can do this, you will pass this test." Yi Xian nodded and sat cross-legged on the ground. Then he began to guide the heavenly fire and ice soul in his body. Fortunately, the heavenly fire and ice soul were quite compatible, so his guidance was quite smooth. Tendo also walked into the ice cave. She found that Yi Xian's body was half ice and half fire. She looked at Yi Xian and said softly, "This cultivation method is something I came up with on a whim. I am not sure what will happen, but in theory it is feasible. Now, we need to put it into practice. If it really works, then your body will become a body of attributes. This kind of physique is no longer a simple body cultivator. There will be very few people who can pose a threat to you. Of course, the premise is that you can succeed." Yi Xian opened his eyes. At this time Tendo said, "Don't talk. Guide them well, and let them live in peace in your body." Yi Xian nodded slightly. He closed his eyes and focused on guiding. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. In the cave, Yi Xian's body kept changing. Sometimes it was fire, sometimes it was ice. After an unknown amount of time, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. In his eyes, one was ice and one was fire. Not only that, there was also lightning flashing. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. "Did you succeed?" Tendo was about to speak. At this moment, a powerful flame suddenly swept out from his body. The next moment, a cold wave suddenly appeared. Yi Xian's body was directly in the sky of ice and fire. Tendo said softly, "There seems to be a problem." Chapter 1144. Something's wrong. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Right at this moment, Tendo's right hand suddenly pressed on his body. In an instant, a powerful force directly suppressed the ice soul and heavenly fire in his body. However, Yi Xian was still half ice and half fire. Yi Xian asked, "What's going on?" The Heaven Dao thought for a moment and said, "You haven't guided them well. Ice and fire are two completely different subordinates. You have to make them reinforce and counteract each other. And you can't allow them to temporarily attain a form of balance. If it's like that, then they'll devour you the moment you touch them." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "How can I make them reinforce and subdue each other?" Tendo smiled and said, Use your body as a medium. As for how to make them reinforce and subdue each other, you have to figure it out yourself. Figure it out yourself. Yi Xian was speechless. Tendo smiled and said, "Let's begin." Yi Xian didn't waste any more time. He slowly closed his eyes and started to guide the ice soul and heavenly fire in his body again. It has to be said that this process was quite painful, because once these two energies came into contact, they would produce an extremely powerful force that would pose a great threat to his body. Therefore, he didn't dare to be careless. Now that these two energies were subduing each other, what he had to do was to make them reinforce each other. Time passed bit by bit. About 3 days later, the two energies in Yi Xian's body began to converge in his body. However, they didn't come into contact with each other. Therefore, from the outside, one would notice that his body was sometimes covered in flames and sometimes covered in ice. 1 day later, Yi Xian was able to calmly control these two completely different energies. Yi Xian stood up and walked out of the ice cave. Tendo looked at him and said with a smile, "You succeeded?" Yi Xian nodded. He opened his palms. In his left hand, there was a ball of flame, and in his right hand, there was a piece of ice. Tendo smiled slightly. "Very good. Come, let's go to the next place." The two of them walked away. As soon as they left, Yi Xian suddenly realized that the icebergs behind him were slowly melting. Tendo suddenly said, "It's normal. If it wasn't for the ice soul here, this 10,000-mile ice mountain would have dissipated countless years ago." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Miss Tendo, there's something I'm curious about. Can I ask you?" Tendo nodded. "Go ahead." Yi Xian looked at Tendo. "In the beginning, when humans first appeared in this universe, you had the ability to kill them, didn't you?" Tendo shook his head. "The humans who first appeared in this world were outsiders." "Outsiders?" Yi Xian frowned. "From the upper realm?" The Tendo said with a smile. "I don't know where these guests are from. As for the question you just asked, I can answer you because I'm too kind." "Too kind?" Yi Xian glanced at Tendo and didn't speak. Tendo said softly, "In the beginning, I didn't expect that the humans in this universe would cause so much damage to the universe." She paused for a moment and continued, "Of course, there's another reason. I was too naive at that time. I thought that humans are good by nature. Everyone is kind, but I underestimated human nature. Of course, since ancient times there have been many good people. Not all people are bad. There have been many outstanding humans in this world, and I have great respect for some of them." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "What if this universe is destroyed?" Tendo said with a smile, "If it's destroyed, then so be it. Nothing is everlasting. Of course, I will do my best to protect it. If I fail, it doesn't matter. At least I will try my best." Yi Xian nodded slightly. "I understand." Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said, "You have to understand something. Sometimes destruction isn't true destruction but rebirth. Just like your body. If it hadn't been destroyed countless times, how could it have become so powerful?" She pointed around and said, "If all the humans in this universe become extinct, after several tens of thousands of years, this universe will be restored to its original state. It will become even better. Of course, it's a bit cruel to make all the humans extinct. However, have you ever thought that if this destruction continues, the spiritual energy of this universe will completely dry up and become a dead universe? At that time, this universe will be completely annihilated, and humanity will still not be able to escape destruction." Yi Xian glanced at Tendo and said, "Why are you telling me this?" Tendo said with a smile, "I don't want to change you. I just want to tell you that our universe is currently very weak. It can't withstand the destruction of humanity." Yi Xian was silent. Protect humanity? He had once thought that if it was within his power, he wouldn't mind blocking the fifth dimension tribulation. After all, he was a human king. However, there was a fatal problem. Just like Tendo said, even if he blocked the fifth dimension tribulation, would the humans of this universe be safe? The spiritual energy of the universe would dry up, and it would eventually perish. At that time, what could he do? The only way was to change. However, how difficult was this change? to make all the cultivators give up their cultivation, let alone others. Even he couldn't do it, so why would he make others do it? It was simply impossible. An endless loop. At this time, Tendo suddenly smiled and said, "Don't think too much about it. All living beings have their own path of return. Everyone has their own destiny. Everything is a cycle of cause and effect. To put it simply, do your best." Yi Xian nodded slightly. Just like Tendo said, it was enough to do his best. Tendo brought Yi Xian to a desert. In the desert, Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said, "Where is your grand Dao Law?" Yi Xian shifted his consciousness, and the great Dao Law appeared between his eyebrows. Tiandao gently grabbed the great Dao Law in her hand, and then she placed the great Dao Law in the sand in front of her. In an instant, the surrounding sand started boiling. Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said, "Sit down." Yi Xian nodded and sat cross-legged in the sand. Tendo lightly snapped her fingers. In an instant, boundless power of the earth appeared in the surroundings. This power of the earth was like a tide and gathered towards Yi Xian. Seeing this, Yi Xian's expression changed. He had never seen so much power of the earth. No, this power of the earth was completely different from the power of the earth that he had used in the past. In front of Yi Xian, Tendo suddenly smiled and said, "This is the power of the earth's core. It comes from the deepest part of the earth. You have only absorbed the power of the earth's surface." Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Tendo suddenly said, "Don't talk. Calm down and absorb this power of the earth. This power of the earth will constantly nourish your body, and then form the true armor of the earth in your body. This armor will not be weaker than your human king shield. Of course, the prerequisite is that you can absorb it well." Hearing this, Yi Xian did not dare to be careless. He slowly closed his eyes and began to guide the power of the earth into his body. At this moment, he was somewhat glad that his body was strong enough. Otherwise, his body would not be able to withstand this power of the earth. This power of the earth was too formidable. It didn't take long for more and more power of the earth to converge into Yi Xian's body. This power of the earth was easier to control than the ice soul and heavenly flame, because the grand Dao Law belonged to him. So, everything went smoothly. Right at this moment, Tendo suddenly raised her head, and then she vanished on the spot. It didn't take long for Tendo to arrive in the boundless starry sky, and then a ray of white light suddenly appeared above her. A moment later, a man walked out from within it. It was the martial saint who had fought Arrow that day. The martial saint glanced down. Meanwhile, Tendo waved her right hand lightly, and then an expanse of white light suddenly enveloped Yi Xian. So the martial saint was unable to see anything. The martial saint gazed at Tendo, and the Tendo smiled and said, "Do you need something?" The martial saint grinned and said, "I came here specially to pay a visit to Miss Tendo." Tendo smiled and said, "Why?" The martial saint bowed slightly and said, "We offended you in the past. Please forgive us, Miss Tendo." Tendo smiled and said, "I'm not angry really." The martial saint hesitated for a moment and then said, "We came here to ask Miss Tendo for a favor." Tendo blinked her eyes and said, "What is it?" The martial saint said in a deep voice, "Miss Tendo, let me first declare that we don't have any evil intentions towards the fifth dimension. Our real goal is the bookstore. As long as we obtain the bookstore, I can guarantee to Miss Tendo that we will never step into the fifth dimension again." Tendo frowned slightly and said, "I didn't stop you from seizing the bookstore." The martial saint looked at Tendo and didn't say anything. Tendo said seriously, "I really didn't care about the matter between you two. You can come down at any time and target Yi Xian at any time." The martial saint hesitated for a moment and then said, "Miss Tendo, do you want us to fight with Yi Xian until both sides suffer?" Tendo shook her head and said, "No, I hope that you two will die together." The martial saint was speechless. Tendo smiled and said, "This is my true opinion. Of course, you two can also shake hands and live in peace. This is what I want to see." The martial saint looked at Tendo and said, "You really won't interfere?" Tendo nodded and said, "Go back and tell them not to worry. If you two fight with Yi Xian, I will absolutely not interfere." The martial saint was silent. Tendo smiled and said, "If you don't believe me, You can imprison me like before, I don't care. The martial saint looked at Tendo and said, Miss must be joking. Tendo smiled and then said, If I didn't guess wrong, you already have a way to deal with Xiao Dao and Arrow. Am I right? The martial saint nodded and said, Yes. Now, only Miss Tendo is left. Tendo smiled and said, I promise you now, if you two fight with him, I will definitely not help. Really? The martial saint nodded slightly and said, Many thanks. He paused and then said, Miss, do you know the true strength of that plain-dressed woman? Tendo nodded and said, I do. The martial saint bowed slightly and said, Please tell me. Tendo smiled and said, Actually, she's not that powerful. She's just about the peak stage of the Shattering Void tier. Really? I fought with her before. And we're evenly matched. Of course, don't fight her one by one. If you want to kill her, the best way is to send all your elites to attack her together, and not give her the slightest chance. Believe me, as long as you all unite and attack together, it won't be difficult to kill her. Really? P.S. Let me say this, if there are criticisms and suggestions in the comments section, I will read them seriously. Everyone don't scold each other. To be honest, whether it's defending me or scolding me, they all hope that my writing will be better. If no one scolds me, no one criticizes me, then that's my sorrow. There are people scolding me, and there are people giving suggestions, which proves that they are still reading my book. Of course, regardless of whether it's Venerable Sword from Heavenly Sword Realm, everyone has to believe me. I, Tendo, am not only good at boasting. I am serious about writing, because this is not only my hobby, but also my livelihood. The readers are not my father, and will not always tolerate me. Thus all this time, I dare not slack off in the slightest. I thank all the readers for their support, and thank all the readers for their company. Chapter 1145. The Peak Stage of the Shattering Void Tier. In the starry sky, the martial saint was silent. He found it hard to believe. The woman in the plain dress had killed one of their super swordsman powerhouses, and it seemed like she had only used a single slash. At this moment, the Tendo suddenly laughed and said, You don't believe me? The martial saint gazed at Tendo. Tendo chuckled and said, I fought her in the past, so I know Dao Yi's strength. Hearing this, the martial saint stared at the Tendo and asked, Did you really fight with her? Tendo nodded, his expression calm. We've exchanged blows, and her strength is really only at the peak stage of the Shattering Void tier. The reason why she's strong is because her swordsman has reached the pinnacle. Of course, there's another reason, and that's because all of you have been looking down on her. If I'm not wrong, after she went up, you also looked down on her, right? The warrior saint said in a deep voice. A sword saint who was not much weaker than Arrow fought with her. In the end, he was killed by a single slash. As she spoke, she looked towards Tendo. If she was only at the peak stage of the Shattering Void tier, she definitely couldn't have done this. Tendo said with a straight face, Do you know why you were instantly killed? The martial sage looked at Tendo and asked, Why? The Tendo smiled and said, She has a secret technique that can raise her realm to the origin returning realm-breaking realm for a short period of time. However, it can only last for a quarter of an hour. If you go to find her after a quarter of an hour, she will definitely die, because at that time, she was at her weakest. The martial saint fell silent. The Tendo suddenly laughed and said, Don't tell me you guys think that she has reached the Gui Yuan breaking realm? Martial saint said softly. To be honest, we feel that she might have reached the legendary release one. Of course, this is just a guess. Nonsense. Tendo suddenly shook his head. You all are simply speaking nonsense. How could she have reached the self-release realm? I'm telling you, I haven't even reached self-release realm. Moreover, with all due respect, if she really reaches self-release, do you think she will let you go? Why doesn't she dare to fight her way to the upper realm and get rid of all of you? Because she did not have the strength to do so. Actually, she's also afraid of you. The martial saint fell silent. The Tendo continued. All of you have made many mistakes along the way. For example, you underestimated me from the start. Sir Martial Saint, you sent an envoy and a formation to imprison me. Tell me, aren't you stupid? And Yi Xian, you actually sent these two people to deal with him. Are you trying to give him your heads? Yet now, all of you are still making a mistake by actually looking down on that woman in a plain dress. Let me give all of you a suggestion. If all of you want to deal with that woman in a plain dress, then the best way is to send out all your extraordinary experts to besiege her, and not give her any chance to escape. Kill her in a single strike. Otherwise, once you kill Yi Xian, she will take revenge on you. The martial saint remained silent. The Tendo smiled. I finally know why you were chased down by the experts of the sixth dimension. Martial sage looked at Tendo, and Tendo smiled and said, because of your indecisiveness. You're afraid of wolves in front of you and tigers behind you. Let me tell you, now is the best time for you to kill that woman in a plain dress. According to what I know, she wants to break through to the origin-breaking realm. Once she reaches that level, you'll be finished. Therefore, if you want to kill her, the best way is to do as I said just now. Send out all your extraordinary experts to besiege her, and kill her in a single strike. The martial saint suddenly said, Miss Tendo seems to want her dead. The Tendo smiled. I want all of you to die. The martial saint. Tiandao giggled. This is what I really think. All right. I still have many things to do. Goodbye. With that, she turned around and disappeared into the distance. In the starry sky, the martial saint was silent for a long time before softly saying, That's right, how could that woman reach self-release? With that, he turned around and disappeared. The Tendo returned to Yi Xian's side. At this moment, Yi Xian was still crazily absorbing the power of the earth. Because of the great Tao law, everything was going smoothly. Just like that, after about 3 days, the desert where Yi Xian was had disappeared. 1,000 li of scarlet land. At this moment, Yi Xian stood up. The moment he stood up, a majestic aura surged out of his body like a storm, and the ground around him trembled. At the same time, the great Tao law suddenly appeared between his eyebrows. The Tendo faintly smiled. Yes, Yi Xian clenched his hands, and in an instant, a thin layer of armor appeared on his body. Earth armor. This time, he felt completely different from before. This earth armor was not weaker than his Taiji shield. The Tendo suddenly smiled and said, It's not enough. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo, and the Tendo smiled. Right now, your body has gathered many kinds of energy, but you haven't completely softened them and turned them into one kind of energy. Simply put, you've just started cultivating the 5 elements absolute body. When we've collected all the attributes, that will be the most difficult time. Whether or not you can cultivate the 5 elements absolute body will depend on your own luck. Yi Xian nodded. Understood. The Tendo smiled and said, Let's go, I'll take you somewhere. With that, she disappeared with Yi Xian. Soon, the two of them came to a dense forest. Yi Xian looked around. He could not see the end of this dense forest. Moreover, this dense forest gave off a primitive aura, giving off a faint sense of oppression. The Tendo faintly smiled and said, This dense forest has existed since Tendo's time. I've always protected it, otherwise it would have disappeared too. With that, she walked towards the inside of the forest. Yi Xian followed the Tendo. From time to time, the sound of birds chirping could be heard in the dense forest. Yi Xian discovered that the spiritual energy in this dense forest was very abundant, more than 10 times better than outside. If it appeared outside, it would definitely cause countless people to go crazy. However, there shouldn't be many people who would dare to have any ideas about this place. After all, this was a place protected by the Tendo. Regarding this woman, he was also afraid of her. The Tendo smiled and said, This place should be the last pure land in this cosmos. Yi Xian asked, Miss Tendo, with your strength, you should be able to leave this cosmos. Am I right? The Tendo nodded. As long as I want to, I can leave at any time. Speaking of which, the 6th dimension even invited me. They invited me to go to the 6th dimension. I don't need to do anything, and I will be treated very well. Yi Xian was somewhat puzzled. Then why don't you go? The Tendo glanced at Yi Xian and said with a smile, This is home. Home. Yi Xian was silent. For him, Wherever his sister was, that was home. The Tendo suddenly stopped. Not far in front of her, there was an emerald green sapling. The Tendo smiled and said, "This sapling is the life heart of this cosmos. Now, I will give it to you." After saying that, she pointed her finger, and the life heart directly entered the space between Yi Xian's eyebrows. Boom! Yi Xian's body was instantly wrapped in an emerald green light. At this moment he felt endless energy. This kind of energy was warm and very comfortable. Tiandao smiled. This heart of life has a special ability, and that is healing. Its healing ability is only slightly inferior to the purple qi in your body. However, it has an ability that your purple qi doesn't have, and that is, it can perfectly fuse with your physical body, turning your body into a body of life. Simply put, in the future, in short, when you fight with others, as long as you are not seriously injured or killed by the other party, it can let your body heal itself. Hearing this, Yi Xian suddenly became excited. Self-healing? This was too important. In the future, if he fought with others, as long as the other party didn't have the ability to kill him instantly, it would be difficult for him to die even if he wanted to. Who could kill him? At this time the Tendo said, "Absorb it into your body first. When all the elemental energies are gathered, we will start to cultivate the 5 elements extreme physique. Now what you need to do is to collect these elemental energies." Yi Xian nodded. He slowly closed his eyes and began to concentrate on absorbing the life heart's energy. About 6 hours later, Yi Xian opened his eyes, and at this moment, a layer of emerald green light appeared on his body. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, he suddenly turned his head and looked around. He found that the spiritual energy in the surroundings began to slowly dissipate. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo a little puzzled. "This is?" The Tendo smiled and said, "The life heart is the core of this place. Now that it has been absorbed by you, the spiritual energy here will slowly dissipate, and then it will become the same as outside." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Miss Tendo, you." The Tendo interrupted Yi Xian's words. "Do you want to ask me why I gave it to you?" Yi Xian nodded. The Tendo blinked. "Because I am scheming against you, hee. Yi Xian." The Tendo smiled. "Let's go." After saying this, she turned and left. Yi Xian glanced at the Tendo, feeling quite complicated. After a while, the Tendo brought Yi Xian to a starry sky. The two stood in the starry sky. Standing in this vast starry sky, Yi Xian suddenly felt small. Humans were very powerful, but compared to this endless universe, they were really too small. The Tendo suddenly smiled and said, "Look at how beautiful the starry sky is." Yi Xian looked at the Tendo. The Tendo was wearing a white dress, spotless. Her long hair fell over her shoulders, and there was a smile on her face. At this moment, the starry sky seemed to lose its color in front of her. The Tendo gently stroked the hair beside her ear and said softly, "We can't see the light, but the light is always there." Saying this, she looked at Yi Xian. "I remember you once said that in this world, the strong are respected, and the fist is the reason. In fact, what you said is not wrong. In a world where the strong are respected, even if you are reasonable, but you don't have the fist, it is useless. However, people with strength should not bully honest people, and should not bully those who do their duty. In my heart, the real strong should be the kind of people who are willing to reason with those who are weaker than them." Yi Xian was silent. The Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "A person's strength does not depend on how strong he is, nor does it depend on how many people he has, but on how he treats those who are weaker than him." Yi Xian looked straight at the Tendo. "Miss Tendo, why are you telling me this?" The Tendo said with a smile, "I'm just saying it casually. Just listen." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "You will destroy humanity for this universe, right?" The Tendo patted Yi Xian's shoulder lightly. "In this universe, there are not only humans. Do you know how many living beings have been killed by humans in this universe? I'm not asking you to rebel against humanity, nor am I asking you to stand on my side. I just want you to understand that humans don't deserve to die, but the other living beings in this universe don't deserve to die either. And this universe doesn't deserve to die either." Saying this, She smiled mischievously. Do you really think I don't have the ability to destroy all humans? Chapter 1146. Destroy all humans. Yi Xian glanced at Tendo. Does this woman not have the ability to destroy humans? In his opinion, she probably does. Not only is this woman strong, but her intelligence is also ridiculously high. How can humans fight against her? At this moment, Tendo spread out her right hand and said softly, "Gather." As soon as she said that, countless star energy suddenly surged out from the surrounding starry sky. At this moment, the star energy filled the entire starry sky. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's expression instantly became incomparably solemn. Just how strong was the heavenly axiom? He doesn't know. He only knows that this woman is definitely much stronger than he imagined. At this moment, the star energy in the surrounding starry sky suddenly surged into Yi Xian's body. Boom! In an instant, Yi Xian directly turned into a starlight person. Tendo looked at Yi Xian. Calm your qi and focus, properly absorb these star energy. Yi Xian nodded. He sat down cross-legged and concentrated on absorbing the star energy. When the star energy surged in, Yi Xian felt like his body is surging like a wave. It is somewhat difficult to suppress. Tendo suddenly said, "Don't suppress it, use guidance. Let it automatically fuse with your body." Yi Xian nodded. He no longer suppressed the star energy, slowly guiding it to fuse with his body. Gradually, Yi Xian's body started to absorb the star energy. Just like this, after about a day, countless star energy fused with his body. But here comes the problem. That is, there is too much elemental energy in his body. These elemental energy have all gathered in his body. It has already started to repel each other. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. Tendo walked in front of Yi Xian. Her right hand lightly pressed on Yi Xian's shoulder. In an instant, all the elemental energy in Yi Xian's body was completely suppressed. Tendo smiled. "It's done." Yi Xian said solemnly. "Forcefully suppressing it like this, will there be an accident?" Tendo nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian was speechless. Tendo added, "But not for the time being. Let's go to the next place." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, "Are there any more elemental energies to absorb?" Tendo nodded. "There's another one." With that, she turned around and left. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before following them. Right now, he could only trust this Tendo. However, the other party probably had no intention of harming him, because if the other party wanted to harm him, there was no need for them to play these games. Right now, he definitely couldn't beat this Tendo. Not long after, Yi Xian followed Tendo to a desolate land. Yi Xian looked around. The surroundings were filled with an eerie aura. Tendo looked around and said softly, "This was once a battlefield." Yi Xian looked at Tendo. "Battlefield?" Tendo nodded. "There was a great battle here, and many people and living beings died." Yi Xian looked around and said, "People from Tendo's era?" Tendo smiled. "Yes, they were from the same era as me. However, those people were outsiders." Yi Xian asked, "Who fought them?" Tendo pointed at himself and said, "Me." Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he said, "You fought them?" Tendo nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "You fought them alone?" Tendo nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian looked at Tendo. "Were there many of them?" Tendo nodded. "There were many of them, but I killed them all. I've buried them here forever." As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. "Awesome, right?" Yi Xian was speechless. Tendo suddenly spread out her right hand and gestured. "Rise." As soon as she said that, the ground in front of Yi Xian suddenly cracked open. Then countless spirits floated up from the ground. When these spirits appeared, the surroundings instantly turned into purgatory. When these spirits saw Tendo, they immediately roared madly, as if they wanted to eat Tendo alive. Yi Xian said softly, "Do they hate you?" Tendo smiled. "I imprisoned them for hundreds of thousands of years. They were imprisoned here and lost their freedom, but they can't die. Do you think they hate me?" Yi Xian glanced at the spirits. Apart from hatred, there was also deep fear and dread in their eyes. Tendo looked at those spirits and smiled. I like it when you see me in a bad mood, but can't do anything about it. Yi Xian was speechless. The spirits roared in a frenzy. They wanted to pounce on the heavenly Tao, but they were locked in place by chains as thin as hair. Tendo looked at Yi Xian. Being imprisoned underground, unable to come out, unable to die, they can only face the darkness endlessly. Do you think it's cruel? Yi Xian nodded. It's cruel. Being imprisoned underground, only able to face the darkness, and for hundreds of thousands of years. This was more than cruel. It was simply inhumane. If it was him, let alone hundreds of thousands of years, he wouldn't even be able to hold on for dozens of days. Yi Xian looked at those spirits. He had to say that these guys were really miserable. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded out from among the spirits. Sir, we've already been punished. Please release us. Tendo looked over. It was a middle-aged man. Not only were there iron chains on his body, but there were also some mysterious blood-red runes. Tendo looked at the middle-aged man and smiled. Do you want to be released? The middle-aged man nodded. Tendo shook his head. Actually, I don't want to release you. I want you to be imprisoned here forever. The spirits instantly started roaring when they heard this. The middle-aged man suddenly roared. Shut up. Hearing this, the spirits around him immediately stopped. The middle-aged man looked at Tendo. What do you want us to do? Tendo didn't answer the middle-aged man. Instead, he looked at Yi Xian. Do you know why they're trapped here? Yi Xian shook his head. Tendo chuckled. Because they've committed an unforgivable crime. They used living people to refine themselves. Not only did they use living people to refine themselves, they even used the countless living beings in this universe to cultivate. Yi Xian frowned. They used living beings to cultivate? Tendo nodded. They seized the vitality of countless living beings in exchange for powerful cultivation. All those years ago, a few tens of millions of living beings in this universe died miserably at their hands because of a moment of carelessness on my part. It wasn't a normal death, it was a tragic death. Because those living beings suffered inhuman torture before they died. Their cultivation methods are extremely cruel. It's completely unimaginable. Yi Xian glanced at the spirits. At this moment, he felt that these fellows weren't so pitiful. Tendo turned around to look at the spirits and smiled. I wanted to imprison all of you forever. But I can give all of you a chance now. The middle-aged man hurriedly said. What chance? Tendo pointed at Yi Xian. Let him absorb it. Hearing this, the spirits were stunned. Soon, the middle-aged man said angrily. Let him absorb it? You want to destroy our souls. Tendo smiled. So you don't want your souls to be destroyed. It's fine. With that, she pressed down with her right hand. It didn't take long for the spirits to slowly sink into the ground. The spirits were instantly terrified when they saw this. Return to the ground. At this moment, the middle-aged man suddenly said, We agree. Tendo withdrew her hand and smiled. I don't like to force others. It's true. You can refuse. If you refuse, I won't destroy your souls. Yi Xian was speechless. The middle-aged man stared at Tendo. We're willing. Tendo blinked. Really? The middle-aged man said fiercely, Really? Tiandao laughed. Do you really want to beat me to death? Unfortunately, you can't. Haha. As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. Am I very arrogant? Yi Xian nodded. Very arrogant. Tendo smiled. When dealing with evil people, you have to be more evil and arrogant than them. With that, she looked at the spirits. You can begin. The middle-aged man looked at Tendo. Remove these shackles for us. Heavenly Tao smiled and said, All right. As soon as she finished speaking, she waved her right hand. The shackles on the spirits disappeared without a trace. When the shackles disappeared, the middle-aged man suddenly roared. Kill. As soon as he finished speaking, he and the spirits around him charged at Tendo. Yi Xian's face changed. These spirits were extremely strong. The weakest was at the sovereign realm when they were alive. Just as Yi Xian was about to take out the soul-suppressing sword, Tendo shook her head and smiled. She flicked her sleeves. In an instant, all the spirits were frozen on the spot. They couldn't move. Yi Xian was stunned. The spirits were also stunned. Tendo looked at Yi Xian. Do you know what this is? Yi Xian shook his head. Tendo smiled. It's called space freeze. It's a kind of space manipulation. Do you want to learn it? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Tendo laughed. I'll teach you after you finish cultivating the 5 elements absolute physique. She looked at the middle-aged man and the spirits. You weren't a match for me when you were alive. What's more now? The middle-aged man glared at Tendo. You will have retribution. Tendo laughed. You are a sinful person. You dare to talk about retribution? Don't you think it's funny? The middle-aged man glared at Tendo with hatred. I curse you. I curse you to die a horrible death. Tendo blinked. I'm so scared. Yi Xian was speechless. The middle-aged man glared at Tendo. If looks could kill, Tendo would have died hundreds of times. Tendo looked at the spirits and shook her head. I don't have much time. I really don't want you to be free. You people should suffer for eternity. When she finished speaking, she waved her right hand. In an instant, the spirits were all enveloped by a mysterious force. In the next moment, the spirits surged towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian was about to dodge when Tendo suddenly said, Absorb them. Let your soul-suppressing sword fuse with you. If you succeed, your soul-suppressing sword will become the second sword in the history of the 5 dimensions. Yi Xian subconsciously asked, What's the first sword? Tendo's mouth curled up. My Tendo sword. Do you want it? If you do, I can give it to you. Yi Xian asked. Free. Tendo nodded. Free. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why are you giving it to me for free? Tendo blinked. Because I want to scheme against you. Haha. Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 1147. Absorb. Yi Xian began to crazily absorb the Yin Soul's power. Not only him, but the soul-suppressing sword was also absorbing. The current him and the soul-suppressing sword were one. The soul-suppressing sword was him. The soul-suppressing sword was different from the executing heaven sword. Along the way, the soul-suppressing sword had grown with him, and he had a lot of resonance with the soul-suppressing sword. As for the executing heaven sword, it was a divine weapon the moment it appeared, and it still lacked some tacit understanding with him. However, he was also slowly fusing with the executing heaven sword. In the field, those Yin souls had no power to resist at all, and could only be absorbed by Yi Xian. Tendo's strength was too terrifying. Yi Xian was truly afraid of this woman, because he had no idea what she was trying to do. What was her goal? He didn't know. He could no longer figure out her intentions. A mysterious woman. In the field, Tendo glanced at Yi Xian, then walked to the side and sat down. She rested her chin on her knees with both hands and looked at Yi Xian. No one knew what she was thinking. One day later, Yi Xian had already absorbed all the Yin souls. Her soul-suppressing sword directly rushed out of his body and soared into the sky, straight into the starry sky. In an instant, the entire starry sky directly turned into a dead domain. A dead domain condensed from the aura of death. Below, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. He opened his palm, and the soul-suppressing sword directly turned into a black light and entered his hand. The aura of death in the starry sky still did not dissipate. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. I feel like my body is filled with death energy. Tendo smiled. Can you suppress it? Yi Xian nodded. With the soul-suppressing sword, I can suppress it. Tendo opened her palm, and the soul-suppressing sword appeared in her hand. She looked at the soul-suppressing sword in her hand and smiled slightly, then handed the sword to Yi Xian. This sword has absorbed the souls of countless evil people. There are countless evil thoughts in the sword. You should use this evil sword to kill evil people. Kill evil people. Yi Xian nodded. I only kill those who deserve to be killed. The Tendo smiled and said, Don't worry. I'm not asking you to change anything. Your nature is very good, so you don't need to change anything. Moreover, I am also very disgusted with some so-called righteous people, because many people like to do evil things in the name of righteousness. Moreover, many people like to impose their own so-called standards of justice on others. So just be yourself. Yi Xian glanced at the Tendo. Aren't you afraid that I'll harm you? Tendo blinked. Will you? Yi Xian was silent. The Tendo laughed. Unless you call for help, you won't be able to defeat me in a short time. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. What level have you reached? Tendo smiled mischievously. Guess. Yi Xian shook his head. Guess my ass. The Tendo laughed and said, Let's go, I'll bring you to a place. We can start cultivating the 5 elements extreme physique. After saying that, she turned around. The moment she turned around, she and Yi Xian appeared in a bamboo house. It was the Tendo's elegant residence. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo beside him. The Tendo sword that you told me about previously. The Tendo smiled and said, That's not urgent for now. Let's cultivate the 5 elements extreme physique first. Yi Xian nodded. Okay. The Tendo hooked her jade-like finger lightly, and some ancient books suddenly flew out from the bookshelves. These ancient books steadily landed in front of Yi Xian. There were more than 30 books. The Tendo pointed at those ancient books. Look at them carefully. Understand them thoroughly. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. What are these? The Tendo smiled and said, They're all explanations about the elemental energy in your body. I've already rewritten them. You can read them directly. Pay more attention to the red dots that I've marked. Those are the important points. Yi Xian nodded. He opened an ancient book. When he saw the contents, his expression changed. Yi Xian looked up at the Tendo. The Tendo smiled and said, What's wrong? Yi Xian said in a deep voice, You wrote all these? The Tendo shook her head. Not really. These are all written by some scholars and outstanding people from ancient and modern times. I just rewrote them and added some of my own ideas or improvements. Actually, you humans really have outstanding talents. Moreover, I have to say that you humans are really blessed by nature. Whether it's in terms of cultivation or growth, you humans have an ability that other races don't have. That is creation. You can create, you can change, and of course, you can also destroy. Moreover, your destruction is stronger than that of any other race. Yi Xian was silent. The Tendo smiled and said, Read carefully. I'm not asking you to discuss life with me. What you need to do now is to become stronger. Because before long, there will be many things that you will have to face alone. Yi Xian nodded, and then lowered his head to read the book. The Tendo immediately left the bamboo house, and did not disturb Yi Xian. Outside the bamboo house, the Tendo sat on a stone bench. In front of her, there was a chessboard. The Tendo said softly, All living beings are not chess pieces. After saying that, she waved her right hand lightly. The chessboard disappeared. At this moment, a little girl suddenly appeared beside the Tendo. The one who came out was Xiaolinger. Behind her, there was a little monster. It was the Warsky beast. Xiaolinger walked in front of the Tendo. She looked at the Tendo and said, Beautiful sister, can you do me a small favor? The Tendo looked at Xiaolinger and said with a smile, What is it? Xiaolinger blinked and said, Can I break through? The Tendo was stunned and then said with a smile, You want to break through? Xiaolinger nodded and said, Yes. The Tendo asked with a smile, Why do you want to break through? Xiaolinger glanced at the bamboo house and said softly, I want to help Big Brother. The Tendo glanced at the bamboo house and said with a smile, Are you not afraid of humans? Xiaolinger slightly lowered her head and said, I am afraid. Humans are the worst. The Tendo said with a smile, But you are not afraid of him, right? Xiaolinger nodded and said, Big Brother is very good. The Tendo smiled and said, Indeed he is okay. If he has the intention to use you, he will lose a lot. After saying that, she paused and said, At any time, people must not lose their kindness. Xiaolinger held the Tendo's hand and said, Beautiful sister, can I break through? The Tendo said with a smile, Of course you can. After saying that, she leaned over and whispered a few words in Xiaolinger's ear. Xiaolinger's eyes lit up and said, Is this okay? The Tendo blinked and said, You can try. Xiaolinger nodded and said, Okay. After saying that, she turned and left. The Warsky beast hurriedly followed. In front of the Tendo, it was too unnatural. In the field, The Tendo shook her head and said with a smile, "Little guy, you are really blessed by heaven." She could naturally see the good fortune that Xiaolinger had. At this moment, she looked up at the sky, her eyes piercing through the galaxy and looking into the distance. She did not know what she saw, but gradually, her eyebrows slightly furrowed. After a moment of silence, the Tendo withdrew her gaze and fell into deep thought. In the bamboo house, Yi Xian was still reading. He had to admit that when he started reading the first ancient book, he was already fascinated. No, it was obsessed. The value of these ancient books was too great. He had never heard of some of the knowledge involved in them before. In the past, he only knew about cultivation such as space. After reading the ancient book about space written by the Tendo, he realized that space was much more complicated than he had imagined. Not only space, but there were also many detailed descriptions of various kinds of energy, which he had never heard of before. In this way, about 3 days later, Yi Xian had finished reading all the ancient books. However, he still wanted to read the ancient books collected by the Tendo, but he was stopped by the Tendo. The Tendo appeared in front of Yi Xian and said with a smile, "You can't read them now." Yi Xian asked, "When can I read them?" The Tendo smiled and said, "You have to cultivate the 5 elements extreme physique first." Yi Xian nodded and said, "All right." The Tendo nodded and said, "Come with me." After saying that, she turned and walked outside. Yi Xian followed. After a while, the Tendo brought him to a pool. Above the pool was a waterfall. The Tendo pointed at the pool and said, "Take off all your clothes and go in." Take off all his clothes. Yi Xian blinked and said, "Can I not take off all my clothes?" The Tendo smiled and said, "You will be shattered by your strength later anyway." Yi Xian thought for a while, and then took off all his clothes. The Tendo was watching the whole process. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo and said, "Aren't you going to leave?" The Tendo shook her head and said, "People with filthy thoughts will see everything as filthy." Yi Xian was speechless. Wasn't she insulting him? The Tendo pointed at the pool in the distance and said, "Go in." Yi Xian nodded and walked into the pool. It was cold and there was nothing special about it. The Tendo pointed, and a white light entered Yi Xian's head. Soon, a lot of information flowed into Yi Xian's brain. Invisible physique art. At this moment the Tendo suddenly said, "This is a mental cultivation method. There are countless types of energy in your body. You have to use your body as a formation, and use this mental cultivation method as a guide to gather all the energy in your body. Then, your body will become like this heaven and earth, able to contain everything." To put it simply, what you have to do is to make your body become like this heaven and earth. This heaven and earth can contain these types of energy, and your body must also be able to. Only then can you be considered to have cultivated the 5 elements extreme physique. Yi Xian nodded, and began to urge the energy in his body. Gradually, the water around him began to surge violently, and at this time, a formation suddenly appeared at the bottom of the water. When this formation appeared, the water around Yi Xian instantly calmed down, and Yi Xian also became illusory, as if he wasn't in this world. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo, and the Tendo smiled and said, "This is a kind of formation, equivalent to the ability of the shattering void tear, making you in a kind of illusory state. In this case, no matter how big the commotion you cause when you sprint, it won't cause any adverse effects to this real world." Yi Xian nodded and said, "Understood." After saying this, he slowly closed his eyes, and then began to cultivate according to the mental cultivation technique of the 5 elements extreme physique that the Tendo had given him. The Tendo glanced at Yi Xian in the pool, and remained silent, thinking about something. In a faraway galaxy, a middle-aged man stood silently. This person was the martial saint who had appeared in the lower realm. The martial saint stood just like that, and in the depths of the galaxy in front of him floated 3 pitch-black coffins. At this time, the coffin on the left suddenly trembled, and immediately after, an illusory figure suddenly appeared not far from the martial saint. In the instant that this illusory figure appeared, the whole galaxy directly became illusory. The martial saint looked at the illusory figure and bowed slightly. Xian Master. The Xian Master said, "Speak." The martial saint said in a low voice, "That plain-dress woman has already entered the higher realm. I request to mobilize 12 ascetic cultivators, 36 defiant cultivators, and an ultimate killing formation to kill her in this realm." As he said this, he paused and then said, "Just in case, I request that the Xian Master send a clone to go with us." The Xian Master laughed lightly. 12 elites at the peak of the Shattering Void tier, 36 at the peak of the Dominator tier, and an ultimate killing formation that can destroy heaven and earth. Aren't you thinking too highly of her? The martial saint said in a low voice. Previously, because we underestimated the enemy, we lost many elites. Thus, we cannot underestimate the enemy this time. Although this woman is only at the peak of the Shattering Void tier, she is a swordsman, and her battle prowess is extraordinary. Moreover, I feel that the words of that Tendo may not be true. Her strength may be slightly stronger than what Tendo said. Thus, just in case, it is best that we send all our elites to kill her in this realm to eliminate any future troubles. As he said this, he turned to look at the faraway galaxy and said softly, "She is about to leave this realm. We do not have time." P.S. Personally, I do not like asking for votes, because I feel that creating works is a kind of hobby, and if it is related to monthly votes or something like that, it seems a bit tacky. However, you also know that this monthly vote is guaranteed every month, and if you do not vote, there will be no more next month. As far as I'm concerned, I despise wastefulness, so I think it's better for you to invest. Put an end to waste, starting with us. Chapter 1148. In the galaxy, the Xian Master was silent for a moment, and then said, "Fine, I'll let this clone go with you." The martial saint nodded, turned and disappeared. The next moment, dozens of powerful auras flashed through the galaxy. At the end of the distant galaxy, the woman in the plain dress looked at the depths of the galaxy, flying through the air. The woman in the plain dress had her hands behind her back, her face expressionless. Her plain dress was spotless, like an otherworldly fairy. Qing'er, this was her original name. In this life, this name could only be used by one person. Thinking of a certain person, the woman in the plain dress couldn't help but smile. This faint smile was enough to make the entire galaxy pale. Obsession? Actually, this wasn't her obsession, but the only reason she was still alive. The woman in the plain dress looked up at the galaxy. Soon, she would leave this realm. At this moment, the space in front of her suddenly trembled, and the next moment, dozens of figures suddenly appeared in front of her. The one in the lead was the clone of the Holy Master, and beside him was the martial saint. Behind them, there were 12 peak stage Shattering Void tier elites and 36 peak stage rulers. This lineup was not weak even in the 6th dimension. The woman in the plain dress looked at them, her expression calm. The Holy Master looked at the woman in the plain dress and frowned because he couldn't sense her. Even he couldn't sense her. The Holy Master's expression gradually became serious. "How should I address you?" The woman in the plain dress looked at the Holy Master, but didn't speak. The Holy Master stared at the woman in the plain dress. "Lady, we don't want to kill you. As long as you promise not to become an enemy of the higher realm, we can let you go." At this moment, he actually had a sliver of intention to retreat. He couldn't see through the woman in front of him, and felt that she was a bit dangerous. The woman in the plain dress looked around. "Is there anyone else?" The Holy Master frowned. At this moment, the martial saint suddenly laughed. "Are we not enough?" The woman in the plain dress looked at the martial saint, and at this moment, an old man beside the martial saint suddenly laughed. "I don't like to waste time. Let me deal with this woman first." After saying this, he directly charged at the woman in the plain dress. Peak stage Shattering Void tier. When he charged at the woman in the plain dress, the space around her and him directly became illusory, shattering the void. The old man looked at the woman in a simple dress, as a savage smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. He didn't hold back this time. An all-out attack. However, When he was only 10 feet away from the woman in the plain dress, his eyes suddenly widened. In the next moment his head flew into the air. Even though his head had flown out, his body was still charging towards the woman in the plain dress. Very quickly, his body fell to the ground a few feet away from the woman in the plain dress. He was decapitated. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned by this scene. At this moment, the Saint Master's expression became unprecedentedly solemn. Instant kill? An ultimate elite at the peak of the Shattering Void tier was instantly killed? At this moment, the martial saint's mind went blank. Peak stage of the Shattering Void tier? This woman was only at the peak stage of the Shattering Void tier? The Saint Lord looked at the woman in the plain dress and was about to speak when the woman in the plain dress suddenly took a step forward. One step was one sword. Chi. Before anyone could react, the Divine Master's clone was directly pierced by a flash of sword light, and behind him, the heads of the 11 Shattering Void tier elites and the 36 dominators flew into the air before they could even react. When their heads flew into the air, their eyes were wide open, filled with disbelief. Instant kill. All of them were instantly killed. This was the last thought in their minds. The Saint Lord's eyes were wide open, filled with disbelief and terror. Terror. He wanted to speak, but he couldn't. As if he sensed something, the Saint Lord suddenly turned around. In the depths of the distant galaxy, a coffin suddenly cracked open, and in the next moment, a shrill scream resounded from within the coffin. No! There was despair in the voice. That sword had gone through the clone and directly struck the main body. A single sword strike had severed the Saint Lord's life, karma, and reincarnation. In the galaxy, the Saint Lord stared fixedly at the woman in the plain dress. At this moment his eyes were filled with terror. He really wanted to speak, but he couldn't, because both his main body and physical body had been destroyed. What kind of sword strike was this? The Saint Lord raised his head to look at the horizon, his eyes filled with unwillingness. In the battlefield, the martial saint was still alive. That sword strike just now hadn't killed him. At this moment, the martial saint's mind was completely blank. At this moment, the woman in the plain dress walked in front of him, glanced at the martial saint, and said, "Is that enough?" After saying that, she was already thousands of kilometers away, and the martial saint's neck suddenly split open in the galaxy. The martial saint's face suddenly became ferocious. Tendo. Tendo. Ah! His voice was like the roar of a wild beast, shaking the galaxy. In the lower realm, beside the pool, Tendo sat quietly. At this moment, she suddenly raised her head, blinked, and then put on an innocent expression. "I only suggested that you guys hit her. It was just a suggestion. I didn't ask you guys to really hit her. So what does it have to do with me? I'm innocent." The martial saint. Tendo shook her head and sighed. "Your group was wiped out, and you blame me? How innocent am I?" "I'm just sitting at home, and the blame falls from the sky." At this moment, the space around Yi Xian in the distance suddenly trembled. Tendo looked at Yi Xian. She had been sitting here for a while, but Yi Xian had not succeeded yet. She wanted to go for a stroll, but at this moment, Yi Xian could not leave her side. This 5 elements extreme physique was not an ordinary cultivation technique, especially when Yi Xian's body had gathered so many different types of energy. One careless move, and Yi Xian could suddenly die on the spot. Therefore, she had to keep looking at Yi Xian. Time passed bit by bit. Yi Xian's brows gradually furrowed, as if he had encountered some difficulty. Tendo stood up and said softly, "Don't be anxious, take your time, I'm here." Yi Xian nodded slightly. He folded his hands in front of his chest, and slowly began to suppress the chaotic energy in his body. About 2 hours later, the water in the pool began to boil. Seeing this, Tendo frowned slightly. She pressed her right hand lightly, and the energy emitted from Yi Xian's body instantly vanished. At this moment, Yi Xian's body suddenly turned into a ball of fire, and the next moment, the fire on his body suddenly disappeared, and he turned into a man of ice. And in less than a breath's time, he turned into a man of thunder. The attribute energy in Yi Xian's body kept changing. Tendo's expression was also not as relaxed as before. This 5 elements extreme physique was created by her, but no one had cultivated it before. It could be said that this 5 elements extreme physique was theoretically reasonable and feasible, but no one had practiced it before. Therefore, she was a little worried. After an unknown period of time, the water around Yi Xian suddenly began to disappear bit by bit. Tendo looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian's body gradually trembled. At this moment, he was a little panicked, because he realized that the energy in his body was a little out of control. Tendo suddenly said, "Calm your chi and focus. Don't follow my mental cultivation method. Follow your own ideas, and do whatever you think is suitable. Don't follow the mental cultivation method." Yi Xian was a little confused. Tendo said again, "From the current situation, there may be some shortcomings in the mental cultivation method, so you need to perfect it yourself." Annoyed and insufficient? Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. "Can I scold you?" Tendo giggled. "Scold me all you want. I'm not angry. I won't take revenge on you, really." Yi Xian. He had to admit that he did not have any temper towards this woman at all. Ignoring Tendo, Yi Xian calmed down and began to slowly cultivate the 5 elements extreme physique mental cultivation method. Invisible extreme physique. Succeed or die trying. Right now, there were too many attributes in his body. If he could not perfectly integrate them, they might kill him. He could not always let Tendo help him suppress them, right? Next to him, Tendo just looked at Yi Xian. She was ready to attack at any time. One day later, the aura around Yi Xian gradually calmed down. At the side, Tiandao's expression also gradually relaxed. Another day passed. On this day, Yi Xian, who was sitting in the water, suddenly opened his eyes. 2 balls of lightning suddenly flew out from his eyes. At the same time, there were all kinds of flames, ice currents, death chi, earth chi. In short, it was very fancy. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly took a deep breath, and soon, all the energy around him returned to his body, and his body trembled. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. Tendo blinked. "Did you succeed?" Yi Xian flew in front of Tendo. He said excitedly, "It should be." Tendo pointed at a certain part of Yi Xian. "Shouldn't you put on your clothes first?" Yi Xian smiled, then quickly put on his clothes. He slowly clenched his fists. At this moment, he felt several different kinds of energy. This feeling was a little strange. Tendo lightly touched Yi Xian's chest. She blinked. "It seems to be a success." "It seems." Yi Xian smiled. "It should be a success." Tendo looked at Yi Xian. "Can I punch you? I promise I won't kill you." F***ck. Yi Xian quickly said, No, I'll try it myself." After saying that, he took out the executing heaven sword and suddenly slashed at his body. This slash, he used all his strength, but the executing heaven sword couldn't even leave a mark on his body. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was stunned, and in the next moment, he suddenly slashed at his throat. This time, there was no trace of his throat. Yi Xian was excited. Nothing happened at all. His current physical body was many times stronger than the indestructible golden body from before. And it could be said that now, even a shattering void tier elite couldn't do anything to him. Yi Xian looked at his own physical body. He laughed loudly. And after laughing for a while, he looked at Tendo. "Come punch me." Tendo blinked, and in the next moment, her fist landed on Yi Xian's body. Pung! Yi Xian instantly flew out. And this flight, he flew no less than several tens of thousands of meters. And the space he passed directly collapsed inch by inch. And his physical body also collapsed inch by inch at this moment. Ah! In the horizon, a heart-wrenching scream came. Chapter 1149. Yi Xian was lying on the ground. There was a pool of blood on the ground. At this moment his mind was blank. This is the 5 elements extreme physique? At this time, Tendo appeared beside Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "Are you okay?" Yi Xian looked at Tendo. "Did I fail?" Tendo shook her head. "You succeeded." Yi Xian was puzzled. "Then why am I still in such a miserable state? I can't even take one punch from you? Tendo blinked. Maybe I am too strong. Yi Xian was speechless. Tendo pulled Yi Xian up and smiled. There are really not many who can take one punch from me. For example, the martial sage from before. He couldn't even take one punch from me. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. In other words, Arrow is no match for you? Arrow. Tendo smiled. Arrow is a little stronger than the martial sage. However, she can't beat me now because I have lived longer than her. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. How strong are you? Tendo blinked. Do you want to hear the truth or a lie? Yi Xian looked at Tendo. Lie first. The heavenly Tao looked up at the sky and looked down on the world. In the 9 heavens and 10 earths, only I am supreme. I Mu Nian Nian, am invincible and peerless. Yi Xian suddenly said. Stop. I want to hear the truth. Tendo looked at Yi Xian. Truth. Yi Xian nodded. Tendo looked at Yi Xian. As long as I want, the universe can disappear now. Yi Xian. The Tendo laughed and said. I'm just joking with you. I'm not that powerful, and I don't really like fighting. As she spoke, she lightly patted Yi Xian's body. That punch just now was to let you understand that your 5 elements extreme physique isn't invincible, and that no cultivation technique or physical body is invincible. There will always be someone stronger than you, and it's definitely not wrong to keep a low profile. Just like when the plain-dressed woman was around, look at how low-key I was. I didn't even come out, so I was living well. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. Is it because of her that you didn't come out? The Tendo laughed and said, Of course. She's so powerful and unreasonable. If I come out, what if she doesn't like me and attacks me with her sword? I'll die in vain. Yi Xian said solemnly. Even you can't beat her? Tendo nodded. I can't beat her. She's too powerful. Her swordsmanship cultivation has already exceeded the scope of my understanding. In fact, she's not only powerful in swordsmanship, but her understanding of power is also very powerful. As she spoke, she paused and said, She gave birth to the sword because of her obsession. Her obsession has already surpassed the sword. It can be said that she doesn't rely on the sword, but the sword relies on her. For a swordsman to cultivate to the point that the sword can't leave her, and even relies on her. Don't you think that's amazing? Yi Xian looked at the Tendo with a strange expression. You seem to admire her quite a lot. Tendo nodded slightly. I do admire her quite a lot, but her temper isn't very good. She's a little irritable. Let me tell you, she wanted to destroy the universe several times. This woman being in this universe is the universe's fortune, but also its misfortune. Yi Xian said solemnly. If she really wants to destroy the universe, what should we do? The Tendo rolled her eyes at Yi Xian. What can we do? We can't beat her, so we can only do nothing. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo. Will you fight to the death with her for the sake of this universe? The Tendo shook her head. I'll escape, run far away. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. Why? Don't you want to protect this universe? The Tendo sighed softly. Big brother, protecting this universe also depends on the situation. If it's the upper realm or the spirit tribe, I'll definitely play with them, because there's hope, and the chances of winning are 50-50. However, if she wants to destroy the universe, then it's not 50-50 but 10. Under such circumstances, if I fight to the death with her, there's no meaning other than sending myself to death. One can be ambitious, but one must know one's limits before doing anything. Don't do things that are beyond one's capabilities, because doing things that are beyond one's capabilities will not only cause one's own death, but it will also implicate the people around him. Yi Xian gave the Tendo a thumbs up. He rarely admired people, but he had to admit that he admired the woman in front of him. The woman in front of him was really a little scary. This woman was really not pedantic at all. Moreover, she dared to face any problems in her heart. If she couldn't beat her, she didn't feel ashamed. If she couldn't beat her, she wouldn't provoke her. If she could beat her, she would kill her. If she couldn't beat her, and you still wanted to beat her, she would run. Most importantly, he didn't feel a trace of arrogance from this Tendo. Many powerhouses had their own arrogance, including Xiao Dao Arrow, but this Tendo didn't. She looked at everything very calmly. Just like when she said that she couldn't beat the woman in the plain dress. She said it very calmly, and didn't feel ashamed at all. I'm not as good as you, but I don't feel ashamed. Powerhouses weren't scary. What was scary was a super powerhouse with a humble and low-key heart. At this moment, he was thinking about how sad the righteous gods in the era of the Tendo were. Going against this woman, wasn't that like going to the latrine with a lantern? At this time, the Tendo suddenly said, your current physical strength is very strong. It can be said that even if Arrow and Xiao Dao join hands, they still can't break your physical defense. Of course, it doesn't mean that the two of them can't beat you, because right now you only have a strong physical body. In terms of martial arts, there is still a big gap between you and them. But this is normal, after all. Arrow is a veteran powerhouse. Her sword attainments and combat experience, even in the 6th dimension, is absolutely top level. As for Xiao Dao, her family is not simple. She is very knowledgeable, and has a lot of treasures. Maybe she has a treasure that can break your physical body. But fortunately, both of them have a good relationship with you. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Xiao Dao's family? The Tendo nodded. Her background is not simple. Think about it. Her current strength is not even 20% of her original strength. If she completely recovers, it can be said that if she completely recovers, I may not be able to beat her. At this point, she seemed to think of something inside. She originally had hope of completely recovering and leaving here. Unfortunately, she was too arrogant and didn't put anyone in her eyes. Let me tell you, if you had met her back then, she wouldn't even have looked at you. She also suffered a great loss and knew that there is always someone better than you. That's why she changed her character. Otherwise, how could this woman be so arrogant? Yi Xian said softly. Is it because of that little white guy? The Tendo nodded. When she saw that little white guy, she was ecstatic, because that little white guy could heal her injuries. Moreover, only that little guy could completely heal her injuries. At that time, she directly tried to rob it. And then she was beaten. He was beaten. Yi Xian. The Tendo looked around. After making sure that there was no one around, she looked at Yi Xian and blinked. She was beaten so badly. Don't say that I said it. That woman is a bit stingy. Yi Xian. The Tendo suddenly sighed in a low voice. I have to say, that man in green, Swordsman, is really powerful. Fortunately, there is him. Otherwise, those spirits of 9 would have attacked. Yi Xian suddenly asked, between the man in green and the woman in white, who is stronger? He had always wanted to ask this question. The Tendo was silent for a moment and then said, both of them have bad tempers. I think, whoever is angrier is stronger. Yi Xian. The Tendo smiled and then said, let's not talk about them. Let's go. I will take you to get the Tendo sword. After saying that, she turned and left. Yi Xian hurriedly followed. The Tendo sword. The upper dimension. There used to be 3 coffins somewhere in the starry sky, but only 2 remain now. There were some mysterious people in front of the coffins. There weren't many, only around 10 of them. They stood there silently, as if they were waiting for something. Right at this moment, the coffin on the right suddenly trembled. In next to no time, the coffin suddenly opened, and a strand of abundant spirit energy floated out from within it. After that, a man walked out. The mysterious people bowed slightly when they saw this man. Greetings, Hall Master. Hall Master. The former Martial Hall Master of the 6th Dimension Alliance Hall, Wu Zongxing. This name had once struck terror into countless people's hearts in the 6th dimension. Wu Zongxing glanced at the coffin on the right. After a moment of silence, he looked at a black-robed old man in front of him. They're all dead. The black-robed old man nodded. The Hallowed Lord and the others were completely annihilated. Wu Zongxing slowly closed his eyes. We underestimated that woman's strength. She's at least at the peak of the Returnance realm. And she might even be at the half-step void realm. Half-step void realm. Hearing this, everyone's expression changed. A super elite with such strength was no joke. Wu Zongxing suddenly asked, she's already left this realm? The black-robed old man nodded. Yes, she has. Hearing this, Wu Zongxing's tightly clenched right hand slowly relaxed. The woman was able to kill the Hallowed Lord's main body through the Hallowed Lord's clone. This strength was not something that Wu Zongxing could resist. Wu Zongxing raised his head and looked towards the depths of the starry sky. He was slightly puzzled. Why was there such a powerful person in the lower realm? This strength was a bit abnormal. After a long moment of silence, Wu Zongxing suddenly said, "I'll make a trip to the Spirit of Nine. In the meantime, you all stay here and wait for my orders." After saying this, he turned and disappeared into the depths of the starry sky. The current higher realm no longer had the ability to target the lower realm, because the higher realm's losses were too severe. 12 elites at the peak of the Shattering Void tier, and 36 at the peak of the Ruler tier. This loss was truly devastating. Now, if they wanted to seize the study room again, they could only borrow power and cooperate with the Spirit of Nine. Moreover, they had to cooperate with the Spirit of Nine, because the lower realm could not possibly sit still and wait for death. If the people of the lower realm counterattacked, whether it was that Tendo, Xiao Dao, or Arrow, they did not dare to underestimate them in the slightest. Especially Tendo. This time, the higher realm could be said to have suffered greatly because of her. This woman was too vicious. P.S. A reader told me that if I updated 5 chapters a day, I would definitely become popular. He said that after I became popular, I would have divinity, I would have dignity, and I had earned enough money. Then, I would be able to update 1 chapter a day, or even 1 chapter a month. To be honest, I'm a little tempted because I want to earn millions every month and become a god with 1 book. But I'm also a little worried. What if I'm still half dead after updating 5 chapters a day? Chapter 1150. Tendo brought Yi Xian to a starry sky. The two of them walked slowly in the starry sky. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Miss Tendo, your name is Mu Nian?" Tendo nodded. "I named it myself. Does it sound nice?" Yi Xian was a little puzzled. "Why did you choose such a name?" Tendo smiled. "If you never forget it, there will be an echo. If you don't forget your original heart, you will be successful from beginning to end." Yi Xian was silent. Tendo smiled. "However, I still want you to call me Tendo." Yi Xian was a little puzzled. "Why?" Tendo smiled mischievously. "In human terms, Nian Nian is a maiden name. It's a nickname. Only the people closest to me can call it." Yi Xian asked, "Do you have any relatives?" Tendo nodded. "Yes, there are quite a few." Yi Xian looked at Tendo. "Where are they?" Tendo smiled. "I'll bring you to meet them later." Yi Xian nodded. "Okay." About an hour later, Tendo stopped. In front of her, and Yi Xian was a dead planet. There was no life on that planet. It had been annihilated for many years. Tendo smiled. "There used to be some humans here. They were very strong. Then they destroyed this planet themselves." Yi Xian was speechless. Tendo said softly, "When I woke up, I locked them up here and let them kill each other. Don't they like to fight? I let them kill to their heart's content. I told them that only one of them could leave this place alive. They were not convinced, and wanted to join forces to beat me. Yes, they shouted something like Tendo was heartless, and wanted to defy the heavens. It seems that this group of people was the first to shout that slogan." Yi Xian asked, "And then?" Tendo blinked his eyes and then said with a smile, "With 1 slash of my sword they all died." He. Yi Xian was speechless. Tendo looked at the dead planet in front of him and said with a smile, "I killed them, but I kept their souls, and then suppressed them all on this planet. I feel that completely killing them is too easy on them. They should pay a painful price for their actions. Therefore, I suppressed their souls on this planet, and made them accompany this destroyed planet." As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "Do you think I'm cruel?" Yi Xian looked at Tendo. "Do you care about what I think?" Tendo smiled. "I'm just asking." As she spoke, she opened her palm. "Come." His voice fell. Buzz. A sword sound suddenly resounded on the dead planet. The next moment, a sword light suddenly appeared in the sight of Yi Xian and Tendo. The sword light was like a meteor cutting through the starry sky, and finally landed steadily in Tendo's hand. The sword light dissipated, and a sword floated in Tendo's hand. The sword was about 3 feet long and 2 fingers wide. The sword was as smooth as a mirror, as if it was made of jade. On the back of the sword, there was the word heaven, and on the front of the sword, there was the word Tao. Tendo sword. Tendo handed the sword to Yi Xian. For you. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. For me for free. Tendo smiled. Otherwise. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Why? Tendo placed the Tendo sword in Yi Xian's hand. She smiled. Because I'm scheming against you. Don't feel bad about it. Think about it. Everything I do has a purpose, including teaching you the 5 elements extreme physique, helping you cultivate, and giving you this sword. There is a purpose. There is a purpose. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. This woman. At this moment his heart was a little complicated. Tendo glanced at the Tendo sword and said, the reason why this sword is called Tendo sword is because there is a law I set inside, which is the Tendo law. It can be said that in this universe, if you have this sword, you can break all laws. Any law in this world will be ineffective against you. In addition, you can also use this swordsman to restore it. For example, after space is broken, you can use this sword to restore it instantly. Simply put, holding this sword, you can say that you are Tendo. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. I'm afraid this won't work, right? Tendo smiled. You can. The lethality of this sword is actually just that. However, it has some special abilities that your executing heaven sword and soul subduing sword don't have. The simplest is that you can summon the power of heaven and earth to your body when you hold this sword. This universe will help you. However, it's best not to use the power of heaven and earth indiscriminately, because it will consume a lot of heaven and earth. In addition, as I said just now, there is the Tendo law. And this Tendo law is not just 1 or 2 but countless. You can slowly experience the benefits in the future. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian put away the Tendo sword and said, Thank you. Tendo smiled. No need to thank me. Let's go. I'll take you to the last place. After saying that, she turned and left. Yi Xian followed. On the way, Yi Xian suddenly asked, Other than the human race, have you suppressed other races? Tendo nodded. Many. In fact, no matter what race it is, there are good and bad. Even the human race has many good people. Speaking of this, she turned to look at Yi Xian. Do you know why I read so many books? Yi Xian said softly, seeking knowledge? Tendo smiled. That's part of the reason. There's another reason. It's restraint. Yi Xian frowned slightly. He was a little puzzled. Tendo smiled and explained. Simply put, the stronger a person is, the more self-centered he may be. Indifference. Many very powerful people are very indifferent to life. They don't respect life. Just like those people before. They didn't care about the life and death of the entire planet's living beings for their own selfishness. They destroyed the entire planet. Saying that, she paused and then continued. I need to restrain myself because I'm very powerful. If I didn't restrain myself, I would have already exterminated you humans. Not only you humans, but all living beings would be miserable, because I'm very powerful. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. You read books to restrain yourself? Tendo nodded. Yes. Apart from that, I also need to maintain a clear mind at all times, because I'm the Tendo of this universe. If I make a stupid decision, countless living beings will lose their lives. Saying that, she looked at Yi Xian. You should know about the 5th dimension. Do you know why so many powers survived the 5th dimension? Yi Xian stared at Tendo. Your reason? Heavenly Tao smiled and said, Yes, let me tell you a secret. I was the one who saved Aluo. I was the one who sent her into the strange beast scripture, allowing her to avoid the 5th dimension tribulation. Of course, she is also very strong. I only helped her a little. Also, the person who created the strange beast scripture was me. Haha. Hearing this, Yi Xian's pupils suddenly shrank. You, Tiandao blinked. Surprised, right? I was the one who created the strange beast scripture. Then, I placed those strange beasts in the strange beast scripture, allowing them to avoid the calamity. Yi Xian stared at Tendo without saying anything. Tendo lightly patted Yi Xian's shoulder. I like the words you said tonight. Those who should be killed must be killed. Those who shouldn't be killed must not be killed. Saying that, she turned her head and looked around. There was a trace of melancholy in her eyes. I like this universe, because I exist because of this universe. It can be said that this universe is my parents. They gave birth to me and raised me. Not only me, but all living beings in this universe should feel reverence and gratitude towards this universe. To be honest, I really want to protect this universe. I want to protect it. But it's easy to destroy, but difficult to create. Saying that, she shook her head. There are many problems that cannot be solved with strength. The universe is very simple, but the living beings on it are very complicated. Especially humans. Humans are the most complicated. I have studied human nature all my life, but I have not been able to find any results. Human nature. Yi Xian was silent. He did not expect that this Tendo would study human nature. At this moment Tendo suddenly smiled. Let's go. Saying that, she disappeared not far away. In the starry sky. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian followed. About an hour later, the will of heaven brought Yi Xian to a village. The village was not big, and it was a little shabby. Yi Xian looked at the village entrance. There were 3 big words, Tendo Village. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. Tendo smiled and said, I wrote it hee. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, a little boy suddenly ran out. The little boy was about 3 or 4 years old and was naked. He quickly ran to Tendo. Tendo picked him up and kissed his chubby little face. Little Moo, did you miss me? The little boy said in a clear voice. Yes. Tendo laughed and walked into the village with the little boy in her arms. Yi Xian followed. After entering the village, Yi Xian found some people. These people were all ordinary people without any cultivation. When they saw Tendo, they all greeted Tendo. Obviously, they were very familiar with Tendo. At this moment, a farmer's woman suddenly smiled and said, Little Nian, who is this young man beside you? Tendo smiled and was about to speak. Suddenly, the farmer's woman laughed and said, He can't be your man, right? Yi Xian was speechless. Hearing the farmer's words, many people in the field looked at Yi Xian. Everyone spoke one after another. Tendo glanced at Yi Xian and said with a smile, Aunt Ma, is your waist better? The farmer's woman patted her waist and said with a smile, It's completely healed. Tendo smiled and walked away with the little boy in his arms. Yi Xian followed. At this moment, Aunt Ma suddenly ran to Tendo's side. She took Tendo's hand, and her eyes fell on Yi Xian. Little Nian, I tell you, you can't find a man just by looking at his appearance. The little brother beside you looks fair and clean, but most of them are good-looking but useless. Let me tell you, when you find a man, you have to find a very hard man, not a soft one. Tendo glanced at a certain part of Yi Xian and said, You mean there? Aunt Ma rolled her eyes at Tendo and said, Definitely there. Otherwise, do you think it's a head? A big head is useless, a small head is hard. Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 1151. Hearing Auntie Ma's words, Tendo covered her mouth and chuckled. Yi Xian glanced at Auntie Ma, and was about to speak when Auntie Ma suddenly said, Little Nian, that nephew of mine is not bad. He's burly, can work, can endure hardship, and treats people well. If you were to be with him, you'd be a good person. Tendo blinked and smiled. Let me think about it. Auntie Ma hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right then, think about it. Tendo smiled and placed the little boy in her arms on the ground. She gently rubbed the little boy's head. Go play by yourself. The little boy raised his head and pointed to his face. Kiss. Tendo laughed and leaned over to kiss the little boy. Only then did the little boy leave happily. Tendo led Yi Xian away. Auntie Ma glanced at Yi Xian provocatively. Yi Xian smiled and said, I'm very hard. Being provoked, Auntie Ma suddenly patted her chest, and her eyes were filled with contempt. Young man, do you want to try? I'd like to see how hard you are. Yi Xian was speechless. In the distance Yi Xian fled. This woman was too powerful. Tendo suddenly smiled. Auntie Ma is very powerful. No one in the village is her match in a quarrel. Yi Xian nodded. She's indeed powerful. Tendo said softly. Many people here have many small thoughts, but they don't have big evil thoughts. Of course, it's also related to their strength, because their strength doesn't allow them to have evil thoughts. However, I also realized that if there's enough benefits or temptation, some honest people will become evil. Saying that, she looked at Yi Xian. I understand a principle here. That is, no one is born evil. Often, there's a reason why a person becomes evil. Of course, some people become evil purely because of ambition and desire. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. Miss Tendo, I feel like you're teaching me something along the way. Tendo shook his head. No, I'm just chatting with you. That's all. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, the Tendo suddenly smiled and said, We're here. Yi Xian looked in front of the Tendo. They were in front of a bamboo house. The Tendo smiled and said, This is my home here. I often come here to sit. After saying that, she pushed the door open and walked in. Yi Xian followed. After entering the bamboo house, Yi Xian was stunned. The bamboo house was filled with ancient books. Furthermore, it was exactly the same as that Yaju. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo. The Tendo smiled and said, Didn't you want to read? Look. After saying that, she pointed at the ancient books in front of her. Feel free to read. Yi Xian nodded. He didn't stand on ceremony, and directly walked to the bookshelf. He picked up an ancient book and started reading. These ancient books weren't divine skills or heart sutras. However, in Yi Xian's opinion, these books were probably more precious than divine skills or heart sutras. These were probably collected and written by the Tendo. In addition to the detailed introduction of various powers, there was also the history of the fifth dimension, especially the ancient book he was reading. This ancient book was called Ancient History. This ancient history recorded the history of the universe from the beginning to the present. All the major events that happened during this period were clearly recorded. At this moment, the entire fifth dimension became clear in Yi Xian's mind. Through this ancient history, Yi Xian discovered that the fifth dimension was divided into a total of 4 eras. The first era was the chaotic era. At that time, the fifth dimension had just appeared. It was chaotic and didn't have any living beings. After the chaotic era was the Tendo era. Tendo also appeared in this era. During the Tendo era, countless living beings appeared in this universe, including humans. During the Tendo era, there was a group of outstanding humans. Among them, there was the Human King. The Human King belonged to the Tendo era. At that time, humans were very weak. Compared to other powerful races, they didn't have any advantages. It was also at that time that the human race was unprecedentedly united. It was also at that time that human civilization appeared and was protected by the human powerhouses. However, when the fifth dimension calamity arrived, human civilization almost disappeared. Why didn't it disappear? Because the Tendo secretly protected human civilization. The book didn't mention this. This was Yi Xian's guess. This was because the book had a description of the fifth dimension calamity. Under the fifth dimension calamity, all living beings would cease to exist. At that time, it was impossible for humans to resist the fifth dimension calamity. In the entire fifth dimension, only the Tendo had the ability to save people under the fifth dimension calamity. During the Tendo era, some people had to be mentioned. They were the righteous gods, people like Tai Yi and the others. However, the ancient history didn't mention much about them. After the Tendo era was the God and Devil era. The God and Devil era was the era of ancestor Amu. At that time countless powerhouses appeared. These people were extremely powerful enough to call themselves gods. The people on the planet that the Tendo sword suppressed were also from the God and Devil era. During that era, many people shouted the slogan, Tendo is heartless and goes against the heavens. This was because the people of that era believed that the fifth dimension calamity was caused by the Tendo. The final result was that all the so-called God and Devil era experts of that era were destroyed. However, the human civilization was still passed down. After the God and Devil era was the ancient era. However, the spiritual energy of the fifth dimension was no longer the same as before. Therefore, no particularly powerful powerhouses appeared in the ancient era. After the ancient era was the Cambrian era. During this era, a person appeared that caught the attention of the Tendo era. Regarding Arrow, the Tendo era gave an evaluation, a mortal body unprecedented. In the entire Cambrian era, only Arrow was recorded in the annals of history. As for the Chalk era, which was also the era of the strange beast scripture, there were no powerful powerhouses. If not for the Tendo era, that era would have been completely erased by the fifth dimension calamity. After the ancient era was the modern era. In this modern era, an extraordinary person appeared, and that person was the prophet. However, in the eyes of the Tendo era, the prophet was an outsider. Just like the plain-clothed woman, they were both outsiders. As for the plain-clothed woman, the Tendo era gave her a definition: dangerous. There was only one word to describe it. As for the green-clothed man, the prophet gave her a definition: the fortune of the fifth dimension. That year that man, with his sword alone, made millions upon millions of specters not dare to take a step forward. Soon, Yi Xian turned to the last page. When he saw the last page, he was stunned. The last page only had 2 words: Yi Xian. Himself? Yi Xian was a bit confused. He raised his head and looked across, but the Tendo was no longer there. Yi Xian walked out of the bamboo house. At this moment, the Tendo era was sitting on a small stone not far from the bamboo house. She was holding a big bowl in her hand. The big bowl was filled with white rice and messy vegetables. She was eating with relish, but the corners of her mouth were covered with oil and rice grains. She had no image at all. Yi Xian walked to the side of the Tendo. The Tendo glanced at him and said with a smile, "Do you want to eat? Aunt Ma made it for me." Yi Xian smiled and said, "She probably wants you to marry her nephew." The Tendo laughed and said, "Actually, her nephew is not bad. It's just that he is too honest, so he can't find a wife." Yi Xian was a bit puzzled. Can't he find a wife because he is honest? The Tendo shook her head and sighed. She wiped the rice grains from the corner of her mouth and said, "An honest man marry a wife? What are you thinking? Haven't you heard of a saying? Women don't like bad men. I have also studied it. Let me tell you, many women are very strange." "Why is that?" "Because I found that most women like bad men. In the secular world, bad men often have many women. On the contrary, honest men have no luck with women." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "Just because they are honest?" The Tendo smiled and said, "Yes. However, there is an even more strange phenomenon. That is, after those bad women are heartbroken, they will find an honest man to marry." As she said, she looked at Yi Xian. "To be honest, many honest men have green heads, hee." Yi Xian was speechless. At this moment the Tendo said, "Of course, not all women are very realistic. Some honest men look honest on the surface, but they are not honest at all. The reason why they are honest is because they have no ability. I have carefully observed 1 or 2 honest men. After they become successful, they are even more unrestrained than those fickle men. Therefore, it has been proven that whether a man is bad or not is often related to his own strength. Of course, there are many men and women who are good. However, if they meet the wrong person at the wrong time, they will be very tragic. Fate is a very mysterious thing," Yi Xian said in a deep voice. "What is fate?" The Tendo fiercely ate 2 mouthfuls of rice and said, "Fate is a very mysterious thing. It can't be explained in a few words. However, I think that everyone has the opportunity to change their fate. Those who work hard will not be too bad. Take the matter between men and women, for example. In the secular world, if a man has money, he will have fate with any woman. It is the same in our martial arts world. Those who are strong will not lack women." Yi Xian looked at the Tendo. "Did you study these things when you had nothing to do?" The Tendo smiled and said, "I like to study many things. I think it is quite interesting." Yi Xian pointed at himself and said, "Am I an honest man?" The Tendo blinked and said, "Are you an honest man?" Yi Xian asked, "Am I not? I don't do anything stupid." The Tendo smiled and said, "As long as you are a fickle man, you will have a special characteristic. Do you know what it is?" Yi Xian asked, "What?" The Tendo smiled and said, "Thick skin. Some are even more powerful. They are simply shameless. Yi Xian's skin is thicker than the barrier of the universe. No, you are shameless." Yi Xian was speechless. The Tendo put the bowl in front of him, then got up and walked to Yi Xian. "What do you want from me?" Yi Xian handed the ancient history book to Yi Xian. "The last page only has my name. What does this mean?" The Tendo smiled and said, "It means that what happens next is written by you." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "What do you mean? You don't want to write anymore?" The Tendo blinked. She looked at Yi Xian, and the corners of her mouth raised slightly. "I tell you, I want to plot against you. Are you afraid?" Hee. Yi Xian was speechless. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.